There's something strangely comforting about the past, not the history you read in school, but the kind hidden away, buried in soil, sealed in stone, or lost beneath the sea. Each artifact we'll explore tonight is more than an object. It's a quiet message, written across thousands of years from people who lived, breathed, and wondered, just like us. As you listen, let your mind drift into those forgotten worlds, where every discovery feels like opening a door that was never meant to be found. The Capitoline Wolf. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes over you when you stand in front of the Capitoline Wolf. It's the kind of quiet that isn't just the absence of sound, it's the stillness of history itself pressing in. Your eyes rest on the dark bronze figure of a wolf, her ribs faintly defined, her head turned slightly as though she's caught in the act of guarding something. Her mouth is slightly open, not in aggression, but as if she is breathing, alive in a way that a lump of metal should never be. And beneath her, two tiny human figures, children, rest on their knees, their hands pressed against her belly, drinking in the life she offers. If you didn't know the story, you might think it strange, two human babies beneath a wolf. But the Capitoline Wolf is no ordinary piece of art. She's an icon of Rome itself. She embodies a legend that begins in violence and ends in the founding of one of the greatest civilizations in history. And yet, for all her fame, her story is tangled in mystery, a mixture of myth, politics, and the deep hazy shadows of the ancient world. When you trace the legend back to its beginning, you arrive at a riverbank, the Tiber, sometime in the distant past. The city of Rome doesn't exist yet. There is no Colosseum, no Roman legions marching across Europe, no marble temples gleaming in the sun. There's only wild countryside, scattered settlements, and a power struggle within a small kingdom. Two baby boys, Romulus and Remus, are born into this turbulence. They are said to be the sons of Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, and the god Mars himself. That alone is enough to make their story larger than life. But not everyone is happy about their existence. The ruling king sees them as a threat and orders them to be killed. The infants are placed in a basket and set adrift on the Tiber, their fate left to the river's mercy. It's here that the wolf enters the story. The basket washes up on the riverbank, and the legend says that a she-wolf finds the babies. Instead of tearing them apart, as nature might suggest, she feeds them. Her milk keeps them alive until a shepherd named Faustulus discovers them and raises them as his own. In time, the boys grow into men, reclaim their birthright, and establish the city of Rome. Though the story takes a dark turn when Romulus kills his brother Remus in a dispute over the city's founding. It is Romulus's name that the city carries forward, but the image of the wolf and the twins becomes the symbol of its origin. The Capitoline wolf sculpture captures this moment, the wolf standing strong and protective, the twins eternally frozen in their act of survival. For centuries, she has stood as a symbol of Rome's resilience and power. But here's where things start to get interesting. No one is completely certain where she actually came from. For generations, it was believed she was an Etruscan work from around the 5th century BCE, a rare surviving piece of that mysterious culture that came before Rome's dominance. The Etruscans were skilled metalworkers, and the style of the wolf seemed to match their craftsmanship. But in recent years, some studies have suggested that the wolf itself might actually be a medieval creation, crafted more than 1,000 years after the time it was thought to have been made. The twins beneath her, they were definitely added in the Renaissance, centuries after the wolf was first cast. Imagine that for a moment. A sculpture that is supposed to be one of the oldest and most sacred symbols of Rome might actually be far younger than the story it tells. If that's true, it wouldn't make her any less iconic, but it does change how we see her. Is she an ancient survivor, or a medieval reinterpretation of an ancient myth? It's the kind of question that makes you slow down and think about how history works, about how the line between truth and legend blurs over time. The bronze itself is fascinating. Stand close to it, and you can see the texture of the fur, not in a perfectly naturalistic way, but in deliberate stylized lines. The wolf's head is large and slightly angular, with eyes that seem to watch you no matter where you stand. Her body has a tension to it, the stance of an animal alert to danger. Art historians have debated whether this is a purely artistic choice or a sign that the sculptor was working from a real-life model. Some suggest the wolf's form doesn't entirely match the proportions of actual wolves found in Italy, hinting that the artist might never have seen one in person. The twins, by contrast, are softer and more naturalistic, a clear mark of Renaissance artistry. Their presence beneath the wolf changes the whole energy of the piece. Without them, she might simply be a predator. With them, she becomes a protector, a mother, a bridge between the wild and the human. If you were to see the Capitoline wolf today, you'd find her in the Capitoline museums in Rome. She has moved around over the centuries, displayed in the Lateran Palace in the Middle Ages, later brought to the Capitoline Hill by Pope Sixtus IV in the 15th century. Everywhere she has gone, she has carried the weight of the Roman identity with her. Even in modern times, she has been used as a political symbol, adopted by the Italian government, displayed on coins, and even sent as diplomatic gifts to other nations. Wherever she appears, she brings with her that silent, unshakable gaze, the look of a creature who knows a secret about survival. And maybe that's why she's so captivating. The legend of Romulus and Remus isn't just about the birth of Rome, it's about survival against impossible odds. It's about the strange kindness that can appear in the most unlikely places. It's about the idea that greatness can emerge from beginnings that seem hopeless. When you look at the Capitoline wolf, you're not just seeing a piece of metal. You're looking at a story that has been told and retold for over 2,000 years. A story that belongs to everyone who has ever faced the world with nothing but the will to endure. If we were to stand in that museum, the room quiet except for the soft shuffle of footsteps, you might notice something strange. Even though the wolf is motionless, there's a sense of life in her, not in the way of a statue imitating life, but in the way of something that carries memory. She is, in a way, a mirror. When you look into her eyes, you might see not just a piece of Rome's past, but something of yourself, your own struggle, your own will to survive. And maybe that's why she remains one of the most amazing ancient artifacts in the world. Not because we know her full history, but because we don't. She is a mystery wrapped in bronze, a story told in silence, a mother to a city that would go on to change the world. The Dervani Papyrus. If you picture a fragile ancient scroll browned with age, brittle to the touch, you might imagine it sitting in a museum display, locked away behind glass. But the Dervani Papyrus, one of the most extraordinary documents to survive from the ancient world, was never meant to be frozen in time. It was written to be read, to be pondered, to guide a reader into a complex and mysterious world of ideas. Today it stands as Europe's oldest surviving manuscript, a fragile voice from around 340 BCE, offering a rare bridge between the mythic and the philosophical. Its story begins not in a library or a royal archive, but in a tomb. In 1962, archaeologists working near the town of Dervani, in northern Greece, uncovered a rich Macedonian burial. Among the grave goods, bronze vessels, weapons, and decorative items, lay something no one expected to find: a charred roll of papyrus. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing more than a blackened cylinder of plant fibers. But to the excavators, its condition was astonishing. Ancient papyrus rarely survives outside the dry sands of Egypt, yet here, in the damp soil of Greece, it had endured for over 2,000 years. Its preservation was, in a strange twist, the result of disaster. At some point in the distant past, possibly during the cremation of the tomb's occupant, the scroll was partially burned. This carbonization, while damaging, helped protect the papyrus from decay. What should have crumbled to dust instead became a delicate relic, waiting for modern scholars to unroll it. When experts carefully separated its fragile layers and began reading its faded Greek letters, they realized they were looking at something extraordinary. The text turned out to be a philosophical commentary on an older Orphic poem, a sacred hymn attributed to the legendary figure Orpheus. Orphism was a mystical religious movement in ancient Greece, one that combined myth, ritual, and a deep concern for the fate of the soul after death. The Derveni Papyrus, however, was not simply repeating the poem, it was analyzing it, line by line, through the lens of early Greek philosophy. This was where the manuscript became truly fascinating. The anonymous author, likely a learned man living in the late classical period, was interpreting the Orphic verses in a rational, almost scientific way. Where the poem spoke of gods and creation myths, the commentator saw natural forces and cosmic processes. For example, when the Orphic text described the birth of the gods, the commentator suggested this was a symbolic way of explaining the origins of the universe and the elements that compose it. In this way, the Derveni Papyrus became a meeting point between two worlds: the mystical traditions of Orphism and the emerging rationalism of Greek philosophy. It blends myth and reason, poetry and analysis, in a way that feels surprisingly modern. The author was not dismissing myth, instead, he was reinterpreting it, drawing out its hidden meanings to reveal what he saw as universal truths. The setting in which the scroll was found adds another layer of intrigue. The papyrus was buried with a wealthy Macedonian man, possibly a high-ranking official or aristocrat. Was the manuscript a treasured personal possession, a guide for the soul's journey after death, or perhaps a philosophical work meant to accompany its owner into eternity, offering wisdom beyond the grave? We cannot know for certain, but the fact that it was placed in the tomb suggests it had deep personal or spiritual value. Over the decades since its discovery, scholars have pored over every surviving fragment. Some letters are clear, others are faint and broken. Yet even in its damaged state, the papyrus has transformed our understanding of ancient thought. It provides rare evidence of how Greeks in the 4th century BCE engaged with their own sacred traditions, not blindly accepting them, but interpreting, questioning, and seeking rational explanations. In a way, the Derveni papyrus is as much about the human mind as it is about the cosmos. It shows that thousands of years ago, people were already wrestling with the same kinds of questions we ask today. Where did the universe come from? What forces shape it? And what does it all mean for us, as living, thinking beings? Reading its words now feels almost intimate, as if the ancient author is leaning across the centuries to share his thoughts. The handwriting, the turns of phrase, the careful reasoning, they remind us that these were real people, not distant shadows. People who lived, wondered, debated, and wrote, just as we do. And somehow, against all odds, their voice has survived in a charred scroll from a forgotten tomb. When you think about it, the survival of the Derveni papyrus is itself a kind of miracle. Fire could have destroyed it completely, moisture could have dissolved it, time could have erased it, yet it endures, fragile, incomplete, but still carrying meaning. It's a reminder that knowledge is both precious and vulnerable, and that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not gold or jewels but words. In the quiet of a museum archive today, the Derveni papyrus rests in controlled conditions, far from the tomb where it lay for centuries. Its words, however, are no longer entombed. They live on in translations, in academic studies, and in the minds of anyone who takes the time to read them. They whisper of a world where myth and reason walked hand in hand, where the quest for understanding was as much a spiritual journey as an intellectual one. And as we turn the pages of its modern editions, we participate in that same journey, seeking meaning, finding connections, and keeping alive the spark of curiosity that lit the mind of its long-ago author. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon brick. The Ishtar Gate. Imagine walking under the burning sun of Mesopotamia over 2,500 years ago. The dust of the desert clings to your sandals. The air is heavy, not just with heat, but with the hum of life from one of the greatest cities the ancient world had ever seen, Babylon. In front of you, rising far above the crowds and market stalls, is a sight that must have taken the breath away from anyone approaching, the Ishtar Gate, constructed during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II, around 575 BCE. This was not simply a gate to a city. It was a statement, an announcement to all who entered that they were stepping into the beating heart of an empire. The bricks themselves, thousands upon thousands of them, were glazed in deep, vivid blues, the kind of color that almost seemed to glow under the Mesopotamian sun. Against that blue shimmered rows of golden creatures, lions, dragons, bulls, each one perfectly formed, each one symbolic of the gods and the power they bestowed on Babylon. You step closer. The lions are not just decorations, they represent Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, the divine protector of the city. The bulls are the sacred animals of Adad, the storm god, whose power brought rain to nourish the land, and the dragons, long-bodied serpentine, belong to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, whose favor was the cornerstone of the city's might. Every animal here is a prayer, a blessing, and a warning all at once. To pass through this gate was to walk into a realm watched over by the gods themselves. Nebuchadnezzar II did not build small. His vision for Babylon was monumental, and the Ishtar Gate was just one part of an immense building project that turned the city into one of the wonders of the ancient world. He rebuilt temples, restored ziggurats, and fortified the city's walls until they were so thick and so high that later writers claimed chariots could race along their tops. The Ishtar Gate, however, was special. It formed the northern entrance to the city, leading directly onto the processional way, a grand ceremonial street lined with more of those brilliant blue bricks and those same divine creatures. In times of festival, especially during the New Year celebrations, this street came alive. Priests would carry statues of the gods down the processional way, past thousands of citizens and visitors who gathered to watch. Trumpets would sound, drums would beat, and the people would cheer as the statues passed under the Ishtar Gate. It was more than a religious ritual, it was a demonstration of Babylon's unity and its connection to the divine. The most remarkable part of this gate, however, is that we can still see much of it today, though not in its original setting. The ruins of Babylon lie in modern-day Iraq, and the remains of the Ishtar Gate were excavated in the early 20th century by a German archaeological team led by Robert Koldewey. Piece by piece, the glazed bricks were carefully removed, catalogued, and transported to Berlin, where they were painstakingly reassembled. Today, a reconstructed section of the gate stands in the Pergamon Museum. Standing in front of it there is both awe and sadness. Awe because the craftsmanship is extraordinary, and the colors, though faded, still carry that strange, deep glow. Sadness because it is no longer in its homeland, no longer the towering entrance to the Babylon Nebuchadnezzar knew. The individual bricks themselves tell their own story. Many are stamped with inscriptions in cuneiform, the world's oldest known writing system, declaring that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had them made for the glory of the gods and the splendor of his city. These stamps are more than vanity, they are history preserved in clay, Each one is like a signature, a direct link to the hand of a king who ruled over one of the most powerful empires of his time. The symbolism of the blue glaze is also worth pausing over. Blue, in ancient Mesopotamia, was associated with the heavens, the realm of the gods. Covering the gate in this color was no accident. It was a way of making the entrance to Babylon, a bridge between the human and the divine. Every traveler passing under its arch was, in a sense, stepping into a sacred space, a place where the power of the gods was believed to be especially strong. Over the centuries, Babylon's glory faded. Conquerors came and went, and the city's walls and gates crumbled into dust. The Ishtar Gate, once a symbol of unshakable power, was buried under the sands of time. But the bricks remained, protected by the dryness of the climate, waiting to be rediscovered. When Koldewey's team unearthed them, they were pulling the colors and symbols of an ancient world back into the light. Today, when historians and archaeologists study those bricks, they are not just looking at art. They are examining clues about Babylonian technology, trade, and culture. The glaze, for example, required advanced kiln techniques and access to rare minerals. This tells us that Babylon was connected to trade networks, stretching far beyond Mesopotamia. The style of the animals links Babylonian art to older traditions from Sumer and Assyria, while also showing innovations unique to Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Even more intriguing are the small variations between bricks, slight differences in the way a lion's paw is shaped, or how a dragon's scales are painted. These variations hint at the human craftsmen behind the work, men whose names are lost to us, but whose skill has endured for over 2 millennia. They worked under the orders of a king, but each left behind tiny fingerprints of individuality in their creations. If we close our eyes and imagine standing at the original Ishtar Gate, the scene might unfold like this. The walls rise high above your head, their blue tiles almost luminous in the sunlight. The gold and white of the animal figures shimmer against the deep color. Around you the sounds of the city mingle. Merchants calling out, children laughing, donkeys braying. The smell of baked bread and cooking meat drifts from the market, and above it all is the feeling that you are standing at the threshold of something monumental, a city that believed itself to be at the center of the world. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon may be gone, but the bricks of the Ishtar Gate remain as a reminder of what was once possible in the ancient world. They tell a story not only of a king's ambition, but of a people's devotion to their gods, their city, and their place in history. And perhaps the most humbling thought is this: even in ruins, even far from their original home, these bricks still have the power to make us stop, stare, and wonder at the skill and vision of a civilization that has been gone for over 2,000 years. Uchi the Iceman's Copper Axe. In the high, silent reaches of the Ötztal Alps, on the border between modern-day Italy and Austria, lies one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds in European history. It was September 1991 when 2 hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were making their way along a glacier near the Tisenjok Pass. The late summer sun had melted away more ice than usual, revealing something unexpected on the surface, a human form, lying face down, half embedded in the ice. At first, the hikers thought it was the body of a modern mountaineer, perhaps someone lost decades earlier. The skin was brown, leathery, and stretched tightly over the bones. They had no idea that they were looking at a man who had walked these mountains more than 5,000 years ago. This was Ochi, Europe's oldest known natural mummy, dating to around 3300 BCE. His body was so well preserved by the ice that every wrinkle, every pore, and even the tattoos on his skin were still visible. But alongside him was something even more remarkable, a finely crafted copper axe. In the context of history, this was not just a tool, it was a symbol of a technological leap, a marker of power, and perhaps even a cause for his death. The axe's blade was made of almost pure copper, an incredibly advanced material for its time. Until this discovery, many archaeologists believed that such metalworking had not yet reached the alpine regions in Ochi's era. The haft was crafted from carefully selected yew wood, fitted perfectly to the socket of the blade, and bound tightly with leather strips. Resin adhesive helped secure it further, showing a surprising level of craftsmanship and understanding of materials. Even after millennia, the axe still carried a faint green patina from the slow oxidation of its copper surface. What does this mean for our understanding of the late Neolithic period? This axe challenged everything we thought we knew. Before Otzi, archaeologists assumed that early copper metallurgy was restricted to more southern and eastern regions. The Alps, they believed, were isolated from such advances. Yet here was proof undeniable that people in these mountains not only knew about metalworking, but had access to it at a level suggesting organized trade or local production. The purity of the copper was striking, over 99% pure. Modern analysis using isotopic fingerprinting revealed that the copper ore likely came from southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers away. This means Otzi, or the people he interacted with, were part of a vast trade network connecting distant communities across prehistoric Europe. Such trade routes would have been dangerous to navigate, passing through rugged mountain terrain and hostile territories. Possessing such a tool would not just make you a skilled worker, it would make you someone of status. But the axe was more than a symbol of prestige. It was also a clue to Otzi's life, and perhaps his death. Analysis of the mummy showed that Otzi did not die peacefully. A flint arrowhead was found lodged in his left shoulder, cutting through an artery. He had deep cuts on his hands, defensive wounds, suggesting he had been in a violent confrontation shortly before he died. Some researchers believe he may have been ambushed, possibly for his valuable possessions. The copper axe, in a world where most still use stone tools, would have been worth killing for. Interestingly, despite the circumstances of his death, the axe was found right beside him. This raises questions. If he was murdered for it, why wasn't it taken? Did his attackers flee before retrieving it? Or was his death not a robbery at all, but something more complex, perhaps political or personal? There's also the possibility that the axe was intentionally left with him as part of a burial ritual. In many ancient cultures, tools, weapons, and ornaments were placed with the dead to accompany them into the afterlife. Could Otzi's axe have been both a practical tool and a sacred object? Looking closer at its construction, the axe shows no signs of heavy wear. The blade's edge was still sharp, suggesting it had not been used extensively for chopping wood or combat. This further supports the idea that it was a high-status object, not simply an everyday implement. In many societies, the more elaborate and well-crafted the weapon, the less likely it was to be used for mundane purposes. It was instead a statement of identity and authority. Forensic studies also revealed something fascinating about the axe's blade. Microscopic wear patterns suggest it had been polished and maintained. The U handle, though cracked with age, was shaped ergonomically, showing that its maker understood both durability and comfort. This wasn't just a tool hastily made, it was a product of skilled hands, designed for someone who valued both function and prestige. The axe also fits into a broader archaeological puzzle. Similar copper tools from around the same era have been found in the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Italian peninsula, but few are as complete and well preserved as Otzi's. The fact that it survived intact for over 5 millennia is almost miraculous. Every detail, from the haft to the blade, offers insights into prehistoric life, metallurgy, and cultural exchange. And yet, despite decades of study, the axe still holds mysteries. We cannot say for certain whether Otzi forged it himself, inherited it, or acquired it through trade or conflict. We don't know whether it marked him as a leader, a warrior, a craftsman, or something else entirely. We can only imagine the journeys it made across forests, valleys, and mountains before it came to rest beside its owner on that frozen slope. Today, Otzi and his copper axe are preserved in the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, displayed in a special climate-controlled chamber that mimics the icy conditions that kept him intact for so long. Visitors can stand just a pane of glass away from a man who lived before the pyramids were built, before Stonehenge was completed, before writing systems had spread across Europe. And beside him, the copper axe, silent, gleaming faintly under the lights, still speaks volumes about a world long gone. When you look at it, you're not just seeing a weapon or a tool, you're seeing a moment in human history when technology, craftsmanship, and social identity came together in a single object. You're seeing proof that even in the high Alps, people were connected to a much larger world. You're seeing a story frozen in time, one that continues to unfold as we study it. And perhaps that's the greatest mystery of all. Not just how Otzi lived and died, but how a single axe could survive 5,000 winters to tell us quietly and without words about the people we once were. The terracotta horse of the Tang dynasty. The earth beneath China's ancient capital cities is like a silent library. Layer upon layer of history lies there, each stratum holding the whispers of dynasties long gone. And among the relics of the Tang dynasty, which ruled between 618 and 907 CE, one particular artifact captures not only the artistic brilliance of the era, but also its immense military strength, the terracotta horse. Discovered in an archaeological site linked to Tang imperial stables, this sculpture dates to around 700 CE. At first glance, it may seem like just another relic, but a closer look reveals something extraordinary. The horse is not an abstract or symbolic representation, it is a creature sculpted with such accuracy and vitality that it appears ready to leap forward at any moment. Its muscles ripple in frozen tension, nostrils flare as if catching the scent of battle, and the finely crafted tack and harness show the hand of an artist who knew horses intimately. The Tang dynasty was an age of prosperity, expansion, and unmatched cultural refinement. It was also a time when horses were not merely animals, they were living engines of empire. Without them, the Tang military machine could not have defended the Silk Road, secured its vast borders, or projected power deep into Central Asia. In Tang society, the horse was a status symbol, a creature celebrated in poetry, painting, and sculpture. To own a fine steed was to own a living treasure, and the imperial stables were filled with them, war horses bred from the best stock across the known world, from the steppes of Mongolia to the deserts of Persia. The terracotta horse before us today was likely created as a grave good, an offering placed in the tomb of a high-ranking military official or noble. In Tang belief, the afterlife was not a place to be entered empty-handed. Just as in life, rank, wealth, and prestige mattered in death. A warrior needed his sword, his armor, and his horse, if not in flesh then in sculpted form, to carry him into eternity. Excavations reveal that these sculptures were not mass-produced in the way Qin dynasty terracotta soldiers had been. Instead, Tang artisans approached each piece with individual care, shaping the body from clay, firing it in kilns, and then painting it in vivid pigments, many of which have now faded with the passing centuries. Once, this horse's mane may have been painted black, its saddle deep crimson, its harness decorated with gold leaf. To imagine it in its original state is to step into the vivid world of the Tang court, where ceremonial processions glittered in sunlight and military parades inspired awe. What makes this artifact so compelling is not just its craftsmanship, but the story it tells about the people who created it. The Tang elite prized horses not only for warfare, but for sport. Polo, imported from Persia, became a favorite pastime in the court. Polo matches were not merely games, they were political events, displays of agility, strategy, and horsemanship. The finest riders and horses were rewarded with imperial favor, their names remembered in court records and poetry. The terracotta horse also reflects the Tang dynasty's openness to foreign influence. The Silk Road was in full operation, and the Tang capital of Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, was a cosmopolitan hub where merchants, diplomats, and travelers from across Asia and the Middle East mingled. In art, this fusion is visible. The horse bears traits of Central Asian breeds, taller frames, muscular builds, and the distinctive high-set necks, bred for both speed and endurance. These were not ordinary animals, they were the prized imports of a dynasty, eager to project power far beyond its borders. As archaeologists studied the sculpture, they found traces of lacquer and mineral-based pigments, confirming that Tang artisans worked with materials that would last centuries. This choice of durable medium was not just practical, it was symbolic. The people of the Tang wanted their glory to outlive them, to be remembered in stone, clay, and paint long after their empires faded. The discovery site itself was layered with clues about the social hierarchy of the time. Alongside the terracotta horse were fragments of pottery, bronze weaponry, and fine ceramics. Some tombs even contained the skeletal remains of real horses, sacrificed to accompany their owners into the afterlife. This practice, though costly, demonstrated the deep cultural and spiritual connection between humans and horses in Tang society. When we look at the terracotta horse today, we are not just seeing a work of art. We are witnessing a snapshot of an entire worldview, one in which military might, cultural refinement, and spiritual belief were intertwined. It speaks to a dynasty that understood the power of image and the importance of legacy. Standing before it in a museum, under the soft glow of display lights, the horse's gaze seems fixed somewhere beyond the present. Perhaps it is looking toward a horizon of its own era, one filled with the sound of drums, the clash of steel, and the thunder of hooves across the plains. Or perhaps, in its stillness, it reminds us that history itself is like a great battlefield, where time, not armies, claims the ultimate victory. The Tang dynasty's terracotta horse remains a masterpiece of both art and history, a silent but eloquent messenger from an age when the fate of empires rode on the back of a steed. The Watchers of Tel Brak. In the arid lands of northeastern Syria, long before the great civilizations of Mesopotamia reached their peak, an ancient settlement, known today as Tel Brak, thrived beside the dusty winds of the desert. Here archaeologists uncovered something that defies easy explanation: small alabaster statues, each barely the height of your hand, yet carved with a strange and unforgettable feature: enormous, staring eyes. These figures, dated to around 3500 BCE, are among the earliest known works of sculpture in the ancient Near East. The site where they were found, Tel Brak, was once a powerful urban center, rivaling the cities of southern Mesopotamia. But unlike the monumental ziggurats or sprawling palace ruins we associate with early civilization, the most haunting legacy of Tel Brak fits in the palm of your hand. The figurines are simple in shape, stylized human forms without much detail to their bodies. The heads are oversized, the necks thin, the hands clasped tightly together, but it's the eyes, perfectly round, deeply incised, and impossibly large, that draw your attention. They seem to stare through time itself, as though they were carved not to look at the living world, but at something beyond it. Some figures have a single head, Others are two-headed, the twin faces looking in different directions, as if keeping watch over more than one realm. Many have no mouth at all, as if speech was unnecessary or forbidden. The craftsmanship is deliberate, with smooth stone surfaces and precision in the shapes of the pupils. This was not casual work. These were made with care, intention, and likely ritual meaning. When these objects were discovered, they were not found scattered across the settlement. Instead, they were buried in a particular area, a building archaeologists have nicknamed the Eye Temple. Here the floor was layered with hundreds of these figurines, almost as if they were offerings. Some were intact, others broken. It's as if generation after generation came to this temple, bringing their own eye figurines and leaving them behind as part of some ancient, now forgotten ceremony. Why the eyes? This question has puzzled researchers for decades. One theory suggests they represent worshippers, their hands clasped in devotion, their wide eyes forever fixed on a divine presence. Another interpretation is that they are guardians, spiritual sentinels meant to watch over the city and protect it from unseen forces. The lack of mouths might suggest they were meant to see and know, but not to speak, silent witnesses to both the living and the dead. Some believe they could be connected to early Mesopotamian religion. In the centuries after these figurines were carved, Mesopotamian art often depicted deities with exaggerated eyes, a sign of attentiveness to the gods. Large eyes in that culture could symbolize spiritual awareness or the ability to see into realms hidden from ordinary sight. If Tel Brok's watchers were part of this belief system, they may have been intended to represent human or divine beings constantly gazing upon the sacred, but the figurines might also represent something more personal. In some ancient cultures, objects like this were created as a kind of stand-in for an individual, to be left at a temple so the gods would always see you, even when you weren't physically there. Perhaps each one was a personal pledge, a way for the people of Tel Brok to ensure their prayers, concerns, and loyalty were remembered. And then there's the unsettling possibility that these figures weren't only about worship. Some scholars point out that the two-headed examples, in particular, have no exact parallels in later Mesopotamian art. Could they have represented supernatural beings, creatures who watched in all directions, guarding against spiritual or physical threats? Or perhaps they represented ancestors, their spirits embodied in stone to keep watch over the living. The Eye Temple itself offers more clues. Its walls were decorated with designs made from different materials, and it contained not just the figurines but also evidence of feasting, animal bones, pottery, and traces of burned offerings. This suggests it was a place of gathering, not just solemn prayer. The figurines may have been part of seasonal festivals or rites of passage. Maybe newborns were dedicated here, their lives placed under the protection of the ever-watching eyes. What's remarkable is how far this imagery traveled. Similar eye idols have been found in other sites across the ancient Near East, though none in such numbers as Tel Brok. This hints that the people of this city were part of a much larger cultural network, sharing symbols and ideas across hundreds of miles. In a world without writing, images like these were a universal language, a way to express ideas of faith, fear, and memory without a single spoken word. When you stand before one of these figurines today, many of which are displayed in museums, you can't help but feel a faint sense of being observed yourself. The eyes don't seem lifeless, they seem fixed on you, just as they were fixed on the ancient worshippers thousands of years ago. And in that unblinking gaze, there's a quiet reminder, while entire civilizations rise and fall, the human need to watch, to be watched over, and to remember the unseen, has never truly gone away. The people of Tel Brok are long gone, their language is unknown, their stories are lost, but the eyes remain. The Chola bronze, Nataraja. The Chola dynasty ruled parts of southern India for centuries, but what they left behind in art and architecture is more than just royal legacy, it is a bridge into how they understood the cosmos. One of the most striking symbols of this vision is the bronze statue of Nataraja, Shiva, in the form of the cosmic dancer. This is not just a sculpture, it's a window into a worldview that connected movement, energy, and divine order. Picture Tamil Nadu around the 10th century. The Chola Empire was thriving, its temples rising like mountains of carved stone, its trade ships carrying spices, textiles, and gold across the Indian Ocean. This was an age when art was not merely decorative. Every line, every detail, every proportion carried meaning. And within this cultural wealth, artisans began to work with bronze in ways that still astonish metallurgists today. The Nataraja image captures a single moment in an eternal cycle, Shiva dancing within a ring of flames. The figure is both serene and dynamic. His hair spreads outward, suggesting the wild movement of the dance, yet his expression is calm, almost meditative. The upper right hand holds a small drum, symbolizing creation, the first beat of existence. The upper left hand carries fire, representing destruction, the end of a cycle. One lower hand gestures in reassurance, telling the viewer not to fear. The other points toward his lifted foot, a symbol of liberation. Beneath his right foot lies a small figure, Apasmara, the dwarf of ignorance, trampled under the force of divine truth. This bronze was not mass-produced. Chola artisans used the lost wax casting method, where the sculpture was first formed in wax, then coated with layers of clay, which hardened into a mold. When the mold was heated, the wax melted away, leaving space for molten bronze. Once cooled, the clay was broken apart, revealing the finished piece. Each statue was unique, no two exactly alike. The skill required to create such balance, proportion, and detail in molten metal was extraordinary, and even today, researchers marvel at the precision. But the Nataraja was not meant to stand still in a museum. It was made for ritual. During certain temple ceremonies, the statue would be adorned with fresh flowers, draped with silk, and taken out into the streets on festival days. To the people watching, this was not a symbolic act, it was a living presence moving among them. For them, Shiva was truly there, dancing before their eyes. The Chola Empire's reach extended far beyond the borders of modern-day Tamil Nadu. Their trade brought them into contact with Southeast Asia, China, and even the Middle East. Bronze Natarajas were sometimes sent as diplomatic gifts, carrying with them not just artistry, but the Chola vision of cosmic order. Even centuries later, these statues appear in far-flung places, testifying to the spread of Chola influence. Modern scholars approach the Nataraja from multiple perspectives. Art historians study the balance of form and movement, noting how the sculptor conveyed motion in a static medium. Religious scholars examine the layers of symbolism, how the dance embodies both destruction and creation in a single moment. Metallurgists analyze the bronze itself, uncovering secrets of ancient alloy composition. The bronze's survival over 1,000 years is itself remarkable. Bronze is durable, but many such works were melted down during invasions or repurposed in later centuries. That this Nataraja survived suggests it was deeply valued, protected through generations, hidden away in times of danger, and restored to honor when peace returned. Today, standing before a Chola Nataraja, you might notice the play of light across the bronze. The flames of the arch seem almost to flicker, the lifted foot seems weightless, despite the metal's solidity. The smile is faint, yet it suggests a knowing beyond words. In that moment you understand why this image endured, why it still speaks to those who see it for the first time. The Chola bronze Nataraja is more than an artifact. It is a concentrated expression of how a civilization understood time, matter, and the divine. It tells us that creation and destruction are not opposites but parts of the same process. It tells us that in the chaos of change, there is still a center of stillness, and it invites us, silently, to join in the dance. The Mauryan Pillar of Ashoka. If you travel across the plains of northern India today, you might stumble upon something unexpected. A tall, perfectly cylindrical column of sandstone rising straight from the earth. It doesn't belong to any building. It isn't part of a ruined temple or palace. Instead, it stands alone, as if placed there deliberately to speak across time. These are the Mauryan pillars, erected more than 2,000 years ago, under the orders of a ruler whose vision stretched far beyond the borders of his empire, Ashoka the Great. Ashoka ruled the Mauryan Empire during the 3rd century BCE, a period when India was united under one of the largest and most powerful states in the ancient world. His empire stretched from the Afghan highlands in the west to the lush forests of Bengal in the east, from the Himalayan foothills in the north to the southern Deccan. At its heart was Pataliputra, a massive city of wooden palaces, fortified walls, and bustling markets. But despite the size of his realm, Ashoka's fame today comes not from his conquests, but from the message he left behind, messages carved into stone for future generations. The pillars were unlike anything that had been built in India before. Each one was carved from a single piece of highly polished sandstone, often brought from quarries hundreds of kilometers away. Standing between 12 and 15 meters tall, these monoliths were crowned with beautifully sculpted capitals, lions, bulls, or other animals, each rendered with remarkable precision. Many of these animal capitals still survive, the most famous being the four-lion capital from Sarnath, which is now the national emblem of India. But it wasn't just their craftsmanship that made the pillars unique. What truly set them apart were the inscriptions. In an age when most rulers celebrated their victories through boasts of conquest, Ashoka's pillars told a different story. Written in the Brahmi script, in languages such as Prakrit, the inscriptions urged people to follow a path of moral conduct, compassion, and tolerance. They promoted kindness to animals, respect for elders, and generosity to those in need. These were not just royal decrees, they were moral reminders intended for all, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest farmer. The story of why Ashoka chose to spread such messages begins with one of the bloodiest chapters of his reign, the conquest of Kalinga. Located along the eastern coast of India, Kalinga resisted Mauryan expansion fiercely. The war that followed was devastating, with tens of thousands killed, and even more displaced. Ashoka, once a ruler who had pursued power through force, was deeply shaken by the suffering he had caused. Historical records tell us that the sight of the battlefield changed him profoundly. It was this turning point that led him to embrace the teachings of Buddhism, focusing on peace rather than conquest. After Kalinga, Ashoka sought to govern not just through laws but through moral example. The pillars became his way of speaking directly to the people, even in regions far from the imperial capital. They were placed at crossroads, near temples, and along major trade routes where travelers and locals alike could read their messages. In a time when literacy was limited, these inscriptions were often read aloud by officials to gatherings of people, spreading Ashoka's vision even further. The physical creation of these pillars was a feat of engineering. Quarry workers would extract massive sandstone blocks, shaping them with chisels and polishing them until their surfaces gleamed like metal. Transporting them over long distances was a logistical challenge. Scholars believe they were moved using wooden sledges, rollers, and possibly river barges. Once at their destinations, they were erected with careful precision to ensure they stood perfectly upright, a task requiring both skill and teamwork. Even today, standing before one of these pillars is an awe-inspiring experience. The stone is smooth beneath your fingers, the inscriptions weathered but still legible in places. You can imagine the hands of the ancient stonemasons at work, carving each letter with patience. You can also imagine the ordinary people of Ashoka's time, pausing during their travels to listen as the inscriptions were read aloud, perhaps feeling a sense of connection to the distant ruler who had placed it there. The pillars also offer an important glimpse into the spread of Buddhism. Ashoka's messages didn't just speak of morality, they also encouraged the promotion of Dharma, the moral law central to Buddhist philosophy. He supported monasteries, sent emissaries to spread the faith as far as Sri Lanka and possibly even the Mediterranean, and emphasized the importance of religious tolerance, urging respect for all faiths. In this way, the pillars served as silent missionaries, carrying not only the emperor's words but also the ideals of compassion and unity. Over the centuries, many of these pillars fell. Earthquakes toppled them, invaders repurposed the stone for other constructions, and weather wore down their inscriptions, but some remain standing where they were placed over 2 millennia ago. Others have been moved to museums for preservation. Each surviving pillar is a direct link to Ashoka's reign, a fragment of a time when an emperor sought to rule not just through power, but through moral persuasion. The most famous of these pillars stands at Sarnath, near the site where the Buddha is believed to have delivered his first sermon. Its lion capital, with 4 lions seated back to back, symbolizes courage, power, and pride. Beneath them are other carvings, a bull, a horse, an elephant, each separated by a wheel, the Dharma chakra, representing the Buddhist path. This imagery, carefully chosen, reflects Ashoka's commitment to the teachings he had adopted. In modern India, Ashoka's legacy is still visible. His lion capital appears on the nation's currency, official documents, and government buildings. The wheel from the base of that capital, the Ashoka chakra, is at the center of India's flag. It is a symbol of movement, progress, and the eternal turning of moral law. These modern uses keep alive the message Ashoka inscribed so many centuries ago, that true strength comes from justice and compassion, not from conquest alone. When you stand before a Mauryan pillar, you are not just looking at a piece of stone. You are standing in the presence of an ancient voice, still speaking across the centuries. The wind that brushes past it may be the same wind that once carried the sound of those inscriptions being read aloud. And in that moment, you understand why Ashoka chose stone, because he wanted his words to last. And last they have. The Ziggurat of Ur Foundation Tablet. If you were to walk the hot, wind-swept plains of southern Iraq today, you might find yourself surrounded by cracked earth, whispering sands, and the faint outlines of ancient structures long reduced to ruins. But hidden beneath the shifting soil, in the remains of the once great city of Ur, archaeologists unearthed something far smaller than the towering ziggurat that dominated the skyline. It was a slab, barely the size of your palm, pressed with the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform writing. At first glance it might seem unremarkable, just another relic from Mesopotamia. But this small tablet is, in fact, a foundation inscription, a message from over 4,000 years ago, left behind by King Ur-Nammu himself, to tell the world of his greatest project, the construction of the Ziggurat of Ur. The ziggurat itself was a monumental stepped pyramid, rising in tier after tier of sun-baked mud brick. It wasn't merely an architectural achievement, it was the heart of Ur, a bridge between the earthly city and the heavens. And this tablet, known as the foundation tablet of the Ziggurat of Ur, is one of the few surviving direct testimonies from its very creator. Imagine the king, dressed in fine wool robes, standing in the shadow of the half-built ziggurat, overseeing hundreds of laborers, masons and brickmakers. Somewhere deep within the foundations, he orders this small tablet to be placed, not to be seen again for thousands of years, so that the gods themselves might know who built their temple. The tablet is written in Sumerian, the world's first written language, using the wedge-shaped impressions of a reed stylus pressed into wet clay. It proclaims that Ur-Nammu, king of Ur and founder of the third dynasty of Ur, had built the great ziggurat in honor of Nana, the moon god. The inscription doesn't just boast of his achievement, it asks for divine favor, for protection over the city, and for the prosperity of its people. This wasn't just a record, it was an act of devotion, an offering sealed within the very bones of the temple. Now let's pause for a moment and picture this city as it once was. Ur stood along the banks of the Euphrates River, in a fertile plain crisscrossed by canals. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of date palms and baked clay. Merchants crowded the streets, their stalls piled high with wool, lapis lazuli, and copper ingots brought from distant lands. The ziggurat dominated the skyline, its gleaming whitewashed walls reflecting the sunlight, visible for miles across the plain. Climbing its tiers would have been a religious experience, each level bringing you closer to the heavens, where the temple of Nana awaited at the summit. The foundation tablet tells us that the ziggurat wasn't just a religious building, it was a statement of power. Ur-Nammu ruled not just by the sword but by architecture. A great ziggurat required immense resources, thousands of workers, countless bricks, and years of labor. By building something so massive, the king was proving both his devotion to the gods and his dominance over the land. It was a message to his people, to rival cities, and perhaps even to the future. I was here, and I built this. Archaeologists found the tablet in the early 20th century, during excavations led by Sir Leonard Woolley. It had been buried deep within the ziggurat's foundation, exactly where Ur-Nammu had intended it to remain. The clay was hardened over millennia, preserving the careful impressions of the scribe's hand. Holding it today, you can still trace the grooves of each cuneiform sign, as sharp as the day it was pressed. The language is ancient, but its intent is clear. This was a king's voice, echoing across 40 centuries. The construction methods described in other records help us imagine how this great structure was raised. Workers shaped millions of mud bricks, stacking them in receding terraces, each layer supported by walls of baked brick set in bitumen mortar. Wooden scaffolding creaked under the weight of stone and clay, and ramps sloped up from the ground so that carts pulled by oxen could carry building materials to higher tiers. Every few levels, workers would stop to conduct rituals, pouring libations or burning incense to ask the gods for strength and protection over the labor. The ziggurat itself has long since crumbled, worn down by centuries of wind and rain, rebuilt and restored in parts, abandoned and reclaimed by the desert. But the foundation tablet survived untouched, hidden away from the elements, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. When it did, it offered historians a rare gift, an exact connection to the mind of a ruler from the dawn of civilization. But there's also a mystery here. The tablet speaks in reverence of Nana, the moon god, as if the deity were watching over every brick laid. It suggests that the ziggurat was not simply a place for human worship, but a dwelling for the god himself, a physical anchor between the heavens and the earth. This raises questions about how the Sumerians viewed their gods. Did they believe Nana truly descended to the ziggurat to rest within the temple, or was the building a symbolic gesture, a massive architectural prayer written in brick and mortar? We may never fully know. What we do know is that Ur-Nammu's reign marked one of the high points of Sumerian civilization. He not only built the ziggurat, but also established one of the earliest known legal codes, predating Hammurabi's famous laws by centuries. His rule was characterized by prosperity, stability, and grand projects like this one. The foundation tablet serves as both a religious dedication and a piece of propaganda, ensuring that his name would be remembered long after his death. Today, the ziggurat of Ur still stands in partial ruin, its lower tiers restored enough to show visitors its original scale. Standing at its base, looking up, you can almost feel the weight of history pressing down. Somewhere beneath your feet, the original foundation stones still hold the hidden spaces where tablets like this one were placed. Most remain undiscovered, buried deep in silence. The one that was found is now displayed in a museum, carefully lit so that each cuneiform mark is visible, just as it was when the scribe finished his work 4,000 years ago. And as you gaze at it, you realize you are looking at the same marks that Ur-Nammu once saw, that he ordered to be placed in the heart of his city's most sacred monument. It's not just an artifact, it's a direct handshake with the ancient world, a moment frozen in clay, carrying a message meant for the gods but now read by human eyes in the modern age. The Silla Gold Crown. In the quiet hills of Korea's ancient city of Gyeongju, something remarkable lay hidden for over a millennium. Beneath layers of earth and stone, within the burial mounds of the Silla kingdom, a glimmer of gold once caught the eye of archaeologists. What they uncovered was not just a treasure, it was a statement of power, faith, and the mysterious connection between royalty and the divine. This was the Silla gold crown. The Silla kingdom, one of the three kingdoms of Korea, thrived from the 1st century BCE until the 10th century CE. Its capital, Gyeongju, was often called the City of Gold by later historians, a poetic nod to the incredible wealth and artistry that once flourished there. While many kingdoms leave behind stone monuments or written records, Silla left something more delicate, yet equally enduring: golden regalia of extraordinary craftsmanship. The crown we speak of today dates to the 5th century CE, during a time when Silla was consolidating its power and asserting itself as a dominant force on the Korean peninsula. At first glance, it is a breathtaking piece. A delicate frame of hammered gold, rising upward in a series of branching projections, each tipped with intricate designs. Hanging from it are small pendants of jade, shimmering in green hues that catch the light like drops of frozen dew. The form of the crown itself is unlike the rounded coronets of medieval Europe. Instead, it takes a more symbolic and vertical form. Historians and archaeologists believe its design draws heavily from shamanistic traditions, which predated the arrival of Buddhism in Korea. The vertical uprights, some shaped like antlers, others like trees, may have represented the axis mundi, the cosmic tree that connects the heavens, earth, and underworld in many ancient belief systems. The antler-like branches in particular are thought to symbolize the spiritual authority of the king or queen, linking them to nature and the animal world. In a shamanic society, the ruler was often not only a political leader, but also a spiritual mediator, someone who could bridge the human and supernatural realms. This crown was not simply worn to display wealth, it was worn to declare divine sanction. The jade pendants, known in Korean as gogok, hold their own layer of symbolism. Found throughout ancient Korea and Japan, gogok were often associated with fertility, life force, and protection against evil. Their crescent shape may represent the moon, tying the crown's design to celestial cycles. In Silla belief, the ruler's role was to maintain harmony between cosmic forces, and this crown made that role visible for all to see. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Silla gold crown is its fragility. Made entirely of thin sheets of hammered gold, it is too delicate to have been worn regularly, especially in battle or public ceremonies involving physical movement. This suggests it may have been reserved for highly specific ritual use, or perhaps made purely as a burial item. Indeed, most Silla crowns have been found in royal tombs, placed beside the deceased ruler. The tomb where this crown was discovered, known as the Cheon Mochong, or Heavenly Horse Tomb, offered a rare glimpse into Silla burial practices. Alongside the crown, archaeologists found golden belts, earrings, and weapons, as well as traces of lacquered saddles and ornate bridles. Such lavish grave goods speak of a society with a clear social hierarchy, where the ruler's death was not an end, but a transition into another realm, one where they continued to reign in the afterlife. What makes the craftsmanship even more remarkable is that the Silla people had no gold mines of their own. This means the gold was likely imported, possibly from as far away as the Altai region, or even parts of Southeast Asia, brought in through the vast trade networks that crisscrossed Eurasia during the early centuries CE. The Silla kingdom, though geographically isolated by mountains and seas, was clearly plugged into the global exchange of goods and ideas. When examined closely, the crown also reveals a blending of influences. The tree-like projections bear similarities to motifs found in Scythian and other steppe nomadic art, hinting at cultural exchanges between Korea and the nomads of the north. The jade pendants show ties to ancient Japanese regalia, while the overall shamanistic design suggests deep local roots. In other words, the Silla gold crown is both global and uniquely Korean, a fusion of far-reaching trade and homegrown tradition. In the dimly lit display cases of the Gyeongju National Museum, the crown now rests under careful protection. Visitors often find themselves lingering before it, drawn in by the sheer delicacy of its form. From a distance, it almost seems too light to be real, as if it could vanish into dust with a single breath. But up close, the fine detail reveals the skill of goldsmiths who worked with tools far more primitive than today's, yet achieved results few modern jewelers could match. Its survival is itself a small miracle. Gold, while resistant to corrosion, can easily be melted down or reshaped. That this crown remained buried and intact for over 1,500 years speaks to both the care with which it was interred and the luck of its undisturbed resting place. For centuries, it lay hidden beneath earth and stone, its brilliance unseen, until careful excavation brought it back into the light. And yet, even in the museum, the crown retains an air of mystery. We do not know the name of the ruler who wore it. We cannot be sure if it was ever placed upon their head in life, or if it was crafted solely to accompany them in death. We can only imagine the ceremonies in which it may have appeared. The flicker of firelight catching on its gold surface, the hush of a gathered court, the slow, deliberate movements of a monarch stepping forward to address their people or commune with the spirits. The Silla gold crown is more than a beautiful object. It is a fragment of a vanished worldview, a physical reminder that ancient kingship was as much about the unseen as the seen. It tells us that power was not only measured in armies or territory, but in the ability to mediate between worlds, to channel the blessings of the divine into the lives of ordinary people. Today, as we stand before it, separated by glass and centuries, we are left with questions. Did the wearer believe the crown truly connected them to the gods? Did the people who watched the ceremonies feel the same? Or was it already, even then, a symbol, powerful because of what it represented rather than what it actually did? Whatever the answers, the Silla gold crown remains one of the most extraordinary surviving pieces of ancient regalia. It bridges the gap between art and authority, between human craftsmanship and cosmic belief. In its delicate branches and dangling jade, it carries the memory of a kingdom that called itself the Land of Gold, and of a ruler whose reach, at least in the eyes of their people, extended beyond the mortal world. And so the crown sits quietly now, in the still air of a museum room, as tourists pass by and the modern city of Gyeongju hums outside. But if you look closely, if you stand long enough and let your mind drift back 15 centuries, you might almost see it again, not in glass, but in motion, glinting in torchlight, carried proudly on the head of a ruler who once commanded both the land and the unseen skies above. The ivory diptych of Stilicho. In the quiet halls of museums, certain artifacts have the ability to pull you backward through time with a kind of gravitational force. They are not simply objects on display, they are pieces of lives once lived, political games once played, and moments once thought worthy of preservation. The ivory diptych of Stilicho is one of those artifacts. It's a small, delicate piece, easy to overlook if you were to pass it quickly. But the moment you pause, the moment your eyes rest on the fine details carved into its surface, you begin to sense the world it comes from. A world where power was shifting, empires were trembling, and one man, a general named Stilicho, tried to hold it all together. The diptych dates to around the year 400 CE, placing it in the final century of the Western Roman Empire's existence. By this time, Rome's glory was no longer the unstoppable force it had been for centuries. The empire was splitting, pressures from invading tribes were constant, and the stability of the government seemed as fragile as the ivory from which this piece was made. Yet this diptych, carved in remarkable detail, shows us a vision of strength, family, and order. At first glance, the front of the diptych shows three figures. Stilicho himself is the central presence. He stands armored, wearing the distinct military attire of a high-ranking Roman commander, his head framed by the sharp lines of a helmet. To his right is his wife, Serena, draped in flowing robes that speak to her noble lineage. Between them stands their young son, Eucherius, clad in a smaller but equally regal outfit, symbolizing the continuation of the family's prominence. It is not just a family portrait, it is a political statement, carved into a material that would endure long after the people it depicts were gone. The choice of ivory was significant. Ivory was a luxury material in the late Roman world, sourced from distant lands through a network of trade routes that stretched into Africa and Asia. To create a diptych in ivory was to signal wealth, status, and refinement. But there's something even more symbolic about this medium. Ivory is resilient, yet smooth enough to allow the finest details to be captured. Every line on Stilicho's armor, every fold in Serena's robes, every strand of hair carved into place was the work of a master craftsman. This wasn't a quick commission, it was a deliberate act of image-making. To fully appreciate the diptych, you have to understand who Stilicho was. Born around 359 CE, he was of mixed heritage, part Roman, part Vandal. That in itself is fascinating, because it placed him in a delicate political position. In a time when Rome still clung to the idea of its own cultural superiority, having a non-Roman father could have been a liability. But Stilicho rose through the ranks of the military, becoming a trusted general under Emperor Theodosius I. When Theodosius died, Stilicho found himself in an even more pivotal role, as the guardian and military commander for the young Emperor Honorius, who was barely a teenager. In this position, Stilicho was effectively ruling the Western Empire, though officially he was still just the emperor's top general. This power, however, came with enemies. Court politics in Ravenna, the imperial capital, were treacherous, and Stilicho had to balance the threats from within with the very real danger of invasions from without. This is the world the diptych represents. Look at Stilicho's stance in the carving, upright, confident, holding a staff of authority. He is presented as the unshakable protector of both his family and the empire. Serena's presence is no less important. She was the niece of Theodosius himself. a connection that reinforced Stilicho's legitimacy in the eyes of the Roman elite. Their son Eucherius stands between them, not simply as a child, but as the intended heir to their position and influence. The diptych is also an object of transition, both culturally and artistically. In earlier centuries, Roman art had been about realism, about capturing the exact features and proportions of its subjects. By the late Empire, that had shifted. Figures became more stylized, proportions more symbolic than literal. In the ivory diptych of Stilicho, we see a blend of these approaches. The detailing of the armor and clothing still shows the old Roman love of craftsmanship, but the facial features are somewhat generalized, almost idealized. This is not meant to be a photographic likeness, it is an image meant to project power and virtue. The reverse side of the diptych is plain, as was often the case, but the hinged format suggests it could be opened like a small book or folded shut to protect the carving inside. Some scholars believe diptychs like this one may have served as presentation gifts, perhaps offered to an ally or a member of the court as a way of cementing loyalty. The fact that this piece survived at all is remarkable given the chaos of the centuries that followed. Not long after this diptych was carved, Stilicho's fortunes changed. The court politics that had always simmered beneath the surface boiled over. His enemies accused him of treason, of colluding with the barbarian invaders, and in 4 late CE, Stilicho was executed. His son Eucherius would also be killed not long after, erasing the family's power entirely. It's chilling to think that within just a few years of the diptych's creation, the idealized image of a powerful Roman family had become a relic of a doomed dynasty, and yet the ivory panel endures. It remains a silent witness to those turbulent years, a small but potent reminder of the last flickers of Roman grandeur. Standing before it today, you can still feel that tension, the desire to project stability in a world that was anything but stable. The diptych shows us not just what Stilicho looked like, but what he wanted the world to believe he represented. If you trace your fingers along the edge of the frame, you might imagine the hands that once held it, perhaps a court official admiring the gift, perhaps a craftsman examining his finished work. The fine lines and shallow reliefs are the result of hours of delicate, deliberate carving. This wasn't just about art, it was about propaganda, about shaping the memory of a man in a time when memory itself was a political weapon. Today, the ivory diptych of Stilicho resides in Milan, preserved behind protective glass. Visitors walk past it, often in silence, some lingering longer than others. The glow of museum lighting softens the ivory's color, bringing out the shadows in the carved folds and armor. You can almost hear the faint echoes of the world it came from, the clink of a soldier's armor, the whispers of a Roman court, the distant sound of horses on a stone-paved street, and as you stand there it's hard not to think about how history remembers people like Stilicho. He tried to hold an empire together, but in the end, both he and that empire fell. All that remains is this small, fragile panel, surviving through the centuries while the marble statues and stone fortresses of his world have crumbled. In the stillness of that moment, you realize that the diptych is more than an artifact. It is a survivor. It carries the weight of an entire era, one that was both magnificent and fragile, and it reminds us that even in the face of collapse, people still tried to leave behind something beautiful, something lasting. In that way, the ivory diptych of Stilicho speaks as much to us today as it did to the world it was carved for over 1600 years ago. The Jewish menorah graffito of Pompeii. If you were to walk the streets of Pompeii before that fateful August day in 79 CE, you might be surprised at what you'd see. It wouldn't just be Roman temples, bustling markets, and the imposing presence of Mount Vesuvius looming over the city. You'd also find subtle, sometimes easily overlooked marks of cultures and communities that had made a life here. One of those traces is something so small and unassuming that you could easily walk past it without noticing, a simple carving on a wall. And yet that carving opens an entire window into a chapter of history that is rarely discussed, the presence of Jewish life in Pompeii. This is the Jewish menorah graffito, a carving that might have been made by an ordinary person nearly 2,000 years ago, but which now holds extraordinary significance. The carving is basic, no elaborate detailing, no grand artistic style, just the familiar 7-branched lampstand, the menorah, scratched into a wall's surface. But to those who know its meaning, it is a deeply powerful symbol. For the Jewish people, the menorah was not merely decoration, it was sacred. It represented the lampstand from the temple in Jerusalem, which, according to tradition, had burned continuously in the holy place. Even after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, an event that took place just a few years before Pompeii's destruction, the menorah remained a central emblem of identity and faith. The existence of this graffito tells us something remarkable. It shows that there was a Jewish community living in Pompeii, or at least Jewish individuals who spent time there. This is not surprising when you remember that the Roman Empire was vast and interconnected, stretching from Britain in the west to Mesopotamia in the east. People moved constantly, merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, slaves, and with them traveled cultures, traditions, and beliefs. In a busy, cosmopolitan port city like Pompeii, it was inevitable that communities from across the empire would live side by side. When archaeologists found this graffito, they began asking questions. Where exactly in Pompeii was it located? Was it scratched into the wall of a private home, perhaps by a Jewish family marking their faith in their personal space? Or was it in a public area, perhaps in a shop, a tavern, or even a communal gathering place where Jewish residents met? Each possibility tells a different story. If it was in a home, it speaks to private devotion. If it was in a public place, it could suggest a more open declaration of identity, even in the heart of a Roman city where most people followed traditional Roman gods. Pompeii, before its destruction, was a place of constant activity. The air would have been filled with the scent of fresh bread from the bakeries, the sound of cartwheels over stone streets, and the voices of merchants calling out their wares. Somewhere among that noise, perhaps in a quiet moment, someone took a sharp object, maybe a nail or a piece of pottery, and carved a menorah into the wall. It was probably done quickly, without any thought that it might last for centuries, and yet the eruption of Mount Vesuvius preserved it, freezing that moment in time. The years leading up to Pompeii's destruction were turbulent for the Jewish people. In 70 CE, Rome's legions had destroyed Jerusalem's Second Temple, a devastating event that reshaped Jewish life forever. Refugees and displaced people would have moved across the empire in the years after, seeking safety, opportunity, or simply a place to start again. Pompeii, with its trade routes and economic opportunities, could have been one of those destinations. Perhaps the person who carved this menorah was one of those who had fled from Judea, carrying memories of the temple and the longing for their homeland. It's important to remember that Pompeii wasn't just a tourist attraction waiting to be uncovered. It was a living, breathing city. Its streets were lined with bakeries, bathhouses, temples, and markets. Families gathered for meals, craftsmen worked at their trades, and children played in the open squares. In that vibrant mix of daily life, people from all over the empire left their own cultural fingerprints, sometimes in grand monuments, sometimes in tiny carvings like this menorah. Archaeologists often describe moments like this as micro-histories. It's not the story of an empire's rise or fall. It's the story of one person making a mark, literally, on the world around them. And yet in that mark lies the larger story of cultural survival, identity, and belonging. The Jewish community in Pompeii may have been small, but their presence was real enough to leave a trace. The menorah carving also sparks questions about daily life for Jews in Pompeii. How did they practice their faith in a Roman city? Did they gather quietly in homes, sharing prayers and stories from the Torah? Did they face challenges or prejudice, or were they simply one group among many in a tolerant, multi-ethnic city? Unfortunately, we may never have definitive answers, but the survival of this graffito suggests that, at least for a time, they felt secure enough to express their identity in public, however subtly. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius changed everything. In a matter of hours, the city was buried under ash and pumice. The lives of its inhabitants, Romans, Greeks, Jews, freedmen and slaves, were all frozen in place. The menorah too was sealed away, unseen for nearly 1,900 years. When it was finally uncovered in the 20th century, it offered archaeologists not just another artifact, but a voice from the past. It was as if someone had reached across 2 millennia to say, "We were here." Today, the Jewish menorah graffito of Pompeii is more than an archaeological curiosity. It's a reminder of how cultures intermingled in the ancient world, and how people carried their beliefs with them no matter where they went. It also reminds us that history is not only about emperors and armies, it's about individuals making small but meaningful marks on their surroundings. When you stand before this carving, you are looking at something made by human hands nearly 2,000 years ago. The person who made it had no idea it would survive a volcanic eruption, centuries of burial, and eventual rediscovery. To them, it may have been no more than a momentary act of devotion or pride, but to us, it is a direct connection to their world, a world where the Roman Empire and the Jewish diaspora intersected in the shadow of a volcano. And so, the Jewish menorah graffito remains, scratched into stone, carrying with it the quiet resilience of a community that lived, worked, and believed in Pompeii, right up until the city's final day. In the grand sweep of history, it may seem small, but like so many small things, it speaks volumes if you take the time to listen. The Luristan bronze horse bit. If you were to walk through the windswept valleys of western Iran, the dry air carrying the scent of dust and ancient earth, you might never guess that buried beneath your feet could be objects of astonishing beauty, objects forged not simply to serve a function, but to speak of status, belief, and the very identity of a people long gone. One such artifact, small enough to fit in your hands, yet grand enough to carry a legacy across millennia, is the Luristan bronze horse bit. Dating back to around 1000 BCE, this object emerges from the heart of the Iron Age, when the tribes of the Luristan region were shaping a distinct cultural identity in the rugged Zagros Mountains. At first glance, it may seem like nothing more than a functional piece of equestrian equipment, but as you look closer, past the green patina of oxidized bronze, you begin to see that it is much more than that. The curves of the metal are deliberate, the surface is alive with detail, the decoration is intricate, almost ceremonial. It's as if the maker was less concerned with building a tool and more intent on forging a statement. The Luristan people, semi-nomadic and fiercely independent, were masters of bronze metallurgy. For them, bronze was not merely a material for weapons and tools, it was a canvas for art, religion, and social meaning. A horse bit in their hands could become a storyteller, and that's what makes this artifact so compelling. It's a blend of utility and artistry, the everyday and the extraordinary. Picture it in its prime. The bronze gleaming, the design catching sunlight as the horse moved. Horses in the ancient Near East were more than transportation, they were symbols of power, prestige, and even the divine. Owning and outfitting a horse in such a way wasn't just practical, it was a public statement. To control a horse with such an object was to control both a valuable animal and the perception of authority that came with it. Archaeologists have found Luristan bronze artifacts in burial sites, suggesting that many of these objects had ritual importance. The horse bit, often accompanied by other ornate harness fittings, may have been buried with warriors or chieftains, a sign that in death, as in life, the individual's identity was bound to the horse. And this wasn't just a matter of vanity. In the beliefs of the time, a well-equipped horse could carry the soul into the afterlife, ensuring status and mobility even beyond death. The artistry of the Luristan bronzes is fascinating in itself. Some depict stylized animals, lions, ibexes, birds of prey, woven into the form of the bit. These creatures weren't chosen at random. Each had symbolic weight, lions for strength, ibexes for agility, birds for spiritual guidance. The designs could also serve as protective charms, ensuring the safety of both rider and mount. The casting process for such pieces required remarkable skill. Ancient craftsmen used the lost wax technique, a process in which a model of the object was sculpted in wax, covered in clay, and then heated so that the wax melted away, leaving a mold into which molten bronze was poured. The detail these artisans achieved, given their tools and materials, is astonishing. Every line, every curve, every small animal motif had to survive both the molding and the cooling process without flaw. And given the number of perfectly preserved examples we've uncovered, it's clear they had mastered their craft. There is also a broader historical context here. Around 1000 BCE, the Luristan region was a crossroads of cultures, Elamite, Assyrian, and later Persian influences, all brushing against the local tribal traditions. Trade routes ran through these mountains, and goods, ideas, and techniques flowed with them. A Luristan bronze horse bit may have been seen not only by the local community, but by traders, emissaries, or even enemy warriors. It was a functional piece, yes, but also a portable emblem of identity. The wear marks on surviving examples tell their own stories. You can almost trace where a rider's hand would have gripped the reins, where a horse's mouth would have worn the edges smooth. These are artifacts that truly lived before they were entombed. Objects that were part of the rhythm of daily life in an Iron Age society. From the clatter of hooves on rocky paths to the silent rituals of burial. What's remarkable is how these objects, often found by chance, have managed to survive the centuries. The climate of the Zagros Mountains helped preserve them, as did the fact that they were made of bronze, durable, resistant to decay, and yet slowly transformed over time into that distinctive green patina we now associate with antiquity. The fact that they are still here for us to study is a testament not only to the material, but to the care with which they were made. Today, many Luristan bronzes, including horse bits, are housed in museums. They sit in glass cases under controlled lighting, their beauty and craftsmanship admired by visitors from around the world. But it's important to remember that they were not created to be museum pieces. They were tools of life, companions in both travel and ceremony, symbols of identity and power in a world where every object had meaning. The Luristan bronze horse bit is a perfect example of how even the most utilitarian items can carry profound cultural weight. It invites us to look closer at the objects we take for granted today and wonder what will they say about us in 3,000 years. Will someone pick up a modern tool or ornament and see in it the same blend of necessity, artistry, and belief? Or have we lost that integration of function and meaning? In the end, the horse bit is more than a relic. It's a bridge, a way to touch the hands and minds of people who lived and thrived in the mountains of Iran over 3 millennia ago. It's proof that even in the smallest, most overlooked details of life, there can be beauty worth preserving and a story worth telling. The Cycladic Marble Figurine. In the scattered islands of the Aegean Sea, long before the rise of the grand temples of Greece, there existed a people whose art was as mysterious as it was beautiful. The Cycladic civilization, flourishing between roughly 3200 and 2000 BCE, left behind very little in the way of monumental architecture or sprawling cities. Instead, their most enduring legacy comes in the form of small, elegantly carved marble figures, statues that seem almost modern in their simplicity, yet carry a depth of mystery that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. The most iconic of these creations is the Cycladic Marble Figurine, usually depicting a female figure, arms folded across the chest, with a flat geometric face and an elongated body. Most are less than a foot tall, though some rare examples reach nearly human height. They are carved from the gleaming white marble of the Cyclades themselves, a material that would later be used in the masterpieces of classical Greek sculpture. What is remarkable about these figurines is how timeless they look. With their clean lines, minimalist proportions, and abstract shapes, they could easily pass for modern art created in the 20th century. Yet these objects were crafted nearly 400–500 years ago by artisans working with simple tools, stone chisels, obsidian blades, and sand for polishing. The first examples were uncovered in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often found in graves. This led early researchers to believe they were funerary objects, perhaps meant to serve as companions, protectors, or symbols of the deceased in the afterlife. The consistent presence of female features, small, understated breasts, a defined abdomen, suggested to some that they might represent a mother goddess or a fertility deity. But the truth is far from certain. Some figurines show signs of having been repaired, which implies they may have been cherished objects during a person's lifetime before being buried with them. Others have faint traces of paint, revealing that they were once brightly decorated, with features like eyes and hair painted onto their smooth marble surfaces. The stark white appearance we see today is not how the ancient Cycladic people would have seen them. There are subtle variations in design that seem to follow regional or chronological patterns. The so-called canonical style, with the folded arms and tilted head, is the most common, but earlier and later styles show different postures and proportions. This suggests that the figurines were part of a long artistic tradition, evolving over centuries. The question of their function continues to spark debate. Were they ritual objects used in ceremonies? Were they votive offerings left in shrines? Were they simply cherished possessions that reflected an idealized human form? The lack of written records from the Cycladic culture leaves us with only the figurines themselves as clues. The cultural context of the Cycladic civilization adds to the mystery. The islands were relatively small and isolated, yet the people were skilled sailors and traders, connecting them to the larger Aegean world. They exchanged obsidian, marble, and pottery with neighboring cultures, and the stylistic influence of their art may have traveled far beyond their shores. It is even possible that Cycladic aesthetics subtly shaped later Greek sculptural traditions. However, the study of these artifacts is complicated by a troubling history of looting. During the early to mid-20th century, many Cycladic figurines were illegally excavated and sold to collectors, often without proper documentation of where they came from. This has made it nearly impossible for archaeologists to reconstruct the full picture of how these objects were used and what they meant to their creators. Museums around the world now display Cycladic figurines, from the National Archaeological Museum in Athens to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Visitors are often struck by their haunting beauty, how something so ancient can feel so modern, so familiar, and yet so distant. Standing before one, you might notice the smoothness of the marble, the deliberate balance in its proportions, and the slight backward tilt of the head that gives it an air of quiet contemplation. Some researchers have suggested that the tilted head might indicate that the figurines were meant to be viewed lying down, as if in sleep. This fits with their frequent presence in graves, where they would have been placed alongside the dead. Others think the pose could signify a posture of devotion or introspection. And then there's the possibility that these figurines had multiple meanings, their significance shifting depending on the context. In life, perhaps they were cherished talismans, passed down through generations. In death, they became companions for the journey into the afterlife. In public spaces, they may have served as symbols of shared cultural identity. One thing is certain, the craftsmanship required to make these figures was extraordinary. Marble is not an easy stone to carve, especially with the simple tools available to the Cycladic people. The smooth, almost flawless surfaces suggest hours of careful sanding and polishing. The proportions, though abstract, are deliberate, with subtle curves and angles that give the figures a sense of harmony and balance. The figurines also seem to follow a mathematical order. Some art historians have noted that the proportions align with geometric ratios, suggesting that the Cycladic artisans had a keen sense of design and symmetry. This level of sophistication challenges the assumption that prehistoric art was purely functional or symbolic. It hints at an appreciation for aesthetics that transcends time and place. Despite their mystery, the Cycladic marble figurines have captured the imagination of people far removed from the ancient Aegean. Modern artists like Pablo Picasso and Constantin Brancusi drew inspiration from their minimalist forms, recognizing in them a universal language of shape and proportion. In this way, the art of a small prehistoric island culture found its way into the heart of modernism. Today, as archaeologists continue to study the Cycladic Islands, new discoveries occasionally emerge. A fragment of a figurine here, a complete statue there. Each find adds a tiny piece to the puzzle, yet the overall picture remains tantalizingly incomplete. Perhaps that is part of their enduring appeal. They invite us to wonder, to imagine, to fill in the gaps with our own interpretations. If you were to stand on one of the Cycladic Islands today, feeling the sun on your face and the wind off the Aegean, you might look at the marble in the hillsides and think about those ancient artisans. You might imagine them choosing a block of stone, shaping it with patience and skill, polishing it until it gleamed in the light. And you might wonder about the person who held that figurine thousands of years ago, what it meant to them, why they cherished it, and how it came to rest in a grave, waiting to be discovered millennia later. In the end, the Cycladic marble figurines are more than just archaeological artifacts. They are reminders of the creativity and artistry of a people whose voices have been lost to time. They are connections between past and present, between the physical and the symbolic, between the known and the unknowable. And in their silent, elegant form, they continue to speak, not in words but in the universal language of beauty and mystery. The Khmer Sandstone Vishnu. It is in the humid depths of the Cambodian jungle, beneath a canopy that lets in only scattered shafts of sunlight, that one of the most remarkable remnants of the Khmer Empire rests. Centuries have passed since the sound of chisels rang against stone here, yet the work left behind feels as though it is still breathing. Carved from a single block of sandstone, the figure of Vishnu lies in serene repose, his vast form stretched upon the serpent Ananta, an image drawn from one of Hinduism's most profound cosmological visions. The Khmer artisans who created this sculpture in the 11th century were masters of detail. You can see it in the smooth contours of Vishnu's body, the careful arrangement of his forearms, the delicate but precise scales carved along the serpent's coils. Despite its age, the work still retains the sense of movement, as though Ananta is slowly shifting beneath him, floating through the endless ocean of existence. This was no mere decoration. The reclining Vishnu scene is a visual representation of the cosmic balance between creation, preservation, and the inevitable cycle of time. In Hindu cosmology, Vishnu rests on Ananta during the intervals between the creation of worlds, floating on the primordial waters, while a lotus blooms from his navel, the seat from which the next creation will emerge. In Khmer temples, such imagery was not only a statement of faith, but also a statement of power. It tied the king's rule to divine authority, suggesting that the ruler was the earthly counterpart to the god who sustains the universe. The 11th century in Cambodia was a time of incredible artistic ambition. Under the rule of the Khmer kings, vast temple complexes like Angkor Wat and Preah Khan were built, adorned with carvings that blended religious devotion with political messaging. This sandstone Vishnu may have been part of a temple's central sanctuary, where it would have been seen only by priests and the king himself. The air inside such sanctuaries was heavy with incense, the dim light broken by the flicker of oil lamps, and the stone seemed to glow under the shifting shadows. One of the most fascinating aspects of this sculpture is the way it connects local Khmer traditions with influences from India. The Khmer Empire, though geographically distant from the Indian subcontinent, was deeply influenced by Indian religion, mythology, and art. The reclining Vishnu motif itself traveled from India to Southeast Asia, adapting to local tastes and symbolic needs. Yet the Khmer artisans left their mark. The features of Vishnu here are slightly different from Indian depictions, the proportions adjusted, the ornamentation reflecting Khmer jewelry styles. The craftsmanship speaks volumes about the skill and organization of Khmer society. Quarrying sandstone, transporting it, and carving it with such precision required a coordinated workforce, specialized knowledge, and a deep understanding of the material. The artisans likely began their work by roughly blocking out the figure, gradually refining it, smoothing surfaces with abrasive stones, and finally adding fine details like the curve of Vishnu's lips or the subtle tension in Ananta's coils. Today, when visitors see this sculpture, whether still in Cambodia or in a museum setting, they are often struck by its sheer scale and presence. Even when detached from its original temple context, it retains an aura that feels timeless. It's a reminder that art was not a luxury for the Khmer kings, it was a necessity, a way of anchoring their rule within a cosmic order. But the story of this Vishnu is also a story of survival. Over the centuries, countless temple sculptures in Cambodia were destroyed, either by the elements or by human hands. Wars, invasions, and later periods of iconoclasm damaged many such works. That this particular reclining Vishnu has endured is remarkable. Each chip and weathered surface speaks of its long journey through time, and yet when you look closely, there is still a sense of calm perfection in his face. The eyes are half closed, as if seeing beyond the physical world. The lips are set in the faintest of smiles, not of amusement, but of knowing. The quiet assurance of a being who understands that the cycles of creation and destruction are infinite, and that the world we see is but one in an endless series. Imagine standing before this sculpture in its original temple, centuries ago. The humid air clings to your skin, the scent of burning incense curls through the shadows. You hear the faint chanting of priests, the rhythmic sound of bells, and before you, the great Vishnu rests upon Ananta, poised between worlds, awaiting the next creation. For the people of the Khmer Empire, this was more than just an image. It was a living symbol of stability in a world of change, a promise that even as kingdoms rise and fall, the divine order remains. And in that way the sandstone Vishnu continues to fulfill its role, even 1,000 years later, reminding us of the enduring human desire to anchor meaning in the vast, shifting ocean of time. The Shell Trumpet of Chavín Shell. Imagine standing deep inside a stone temple high in the Peruvian Andes, the air heavy with the scent of burning resin, the light dim, and the walls close around you. The passageways are narrow, twisting, almost maze-like, as if designed to disorient anyone who enters. Somewhere ahead, you hear a sound, low, rumbling, and resonant. It doesn't sound like a drum or a human voice. It is deeper, almost oceanic, as though the sea itself has been brought to these mountains. That sound is coming from a conch shell. Not an ordinary shell, but one carefully cut, polished, and transformed into a ceremonial trumpet more than 2,000 years ago. This is the Shell Trumpet of Chavín Shell, an artifact that connects the mountains to the sea, and the physical to the spiritual. The Chavín civilization thrived in Peru between roughly 900 and 200 BCE. It was one of South America's earliest and most influential cultures, predating the Inca by over a millennium. Chavín Shell, their ceremonial and political center, sat in a highland valley surrounded by mountains, yet the culture's influence stretched far beyond these peaks, reaching the Pacific coast hundreds of kilometers away. This is important because the shell trumpet at the heart of our story comes from the ocean. It is a Strombus galatus conch, a large marine shell that would have been collected from the warm waters along the coast of what is now Ecuador, or northern Peru. The journey of that shell from the sea to the mountains was no small feat. It would have traveled through multiple ecological zones, carried along ancient trade routes that linked distant communities. To the Chavín, the shell was more than just a material from far away. It was a link to another world. In many ancient Andean belief systems, the sea represented the origin of life, a place of mystery and spiritual power. Bringing a piece of that realm into their sacred temples was an act filled with meaning. The shell was carefully modified by skilled artisans. A hole was cut at its apex so that when blown into, it produced a deep, resonant tone. The surface was often polished to a soft sheen, and in some cases, decorated with incised patterns or symbolic motifs. These were not everyday objects. They were ritual instruments, played in specific ceremonial contexts. Archaeologists have found several of these shell trumpets in the galleries of Chavín Shell, tucked away in narrow passages and chambers. Their placement suggests they were integral to the temple's sensory experience. Chavín Shell is famous for its labyrinthine architecture. The temple complex contains a network of underground galleries, each with different acoustic properties. When a shell trumpet was blown within these spaces, the sound would reverberate through the stone corridors, amplifying and distorting it. Imagine being in total darkness, hearing that unearthly drone surrounding you. It would have been disorienting, perhaps even frightening, an intentional effect, as Chavín ritual specialists likely used sensory manipulation to induce altered states of awareness in participants. The sound of the shell trumpet is unlike anything most of us hear in daily life. Modern researchers who have played replicas describe it as a deep, pulsing roar, halfway between a foghorn and the call of a large animal. In the dark, echoing chambers, this sound could seem to come from all directions at once. Combined with the effects of hallucinogenic plants which the Chavín are believed to have used in certain rituals, the auditory experience would have been overwhelming. These rituals were not simply performances, they were acts of transformation. Participants may have believed that the sound of the conch was the voice of the gods, or the call of supernatural beings that inhabited the temple. The image of the Strombus shell appears in Chavín art, often held by anthropomorphic figures with fanged mouths and elaborate headdresses. In some depictions, the shell is paired with feline and serpent imagery, suggesting connections to powerful mythic forces. The shell trumpet also carried symbolic weight beyond the ceremony itself. In Andean cosmology, the world was often divided into three realms: the upper world of the gods, the middle world of humans, and the lower world of the dead and ancestors. The deep, resonant sound of the shell could be imagined as a bridge between these layers of existence, a sound that traveled between realms. In this sense, the shell trumpet was not just an instrument, but a tool of communication with the unseen. One of the most striking aspects of the Chavín Shell Trumpets is their durability. Made of thick marine shells, they have survived more than 2,000 years buried in the earth. When archaeologists uncovered them, they found that many were still playable. This allows us to hear, in our own time, the same sounds that echoed through those temple corridors in the first millennium BCE. The discovery of these instruments has shed light on the sophistication of Chavín ritual life. It tells us that their ceremonies were not limited to sight and touch, but involved carefully orchestrated soundscapes. This aligns with evidence from other ancient cultures where sound played a crucial role in spiritual experience, from the chanting of Vedic priests in India to the booming of taiko drums in Japan to the didgeridoo in Australia. The Chavín Shell Trumpet was part of this global tradition of using sound as a pathway to altered consciousness. Yet there is still much we do not know. Were the shell trumpets played only by elite priests, or could initiates and participants join in? Were they used to signal the start of a ritual, or to accompany specific stages of the ceremony? Did their sound carry symbolic messages, much like a spoken language, understood only by the initiated? The absence of written records from the Chavín means that these questions remain open, inviting speculation and further research. What we can say for certain is that the shell trumpet was a marvel of cultural synthesis. It brought together the natural world, the sea, the mountains, the animal forms represented in Chavín art, with human craftsmanship and spiritual belief. Its sound could merge with the rush of the nearby rivers, the wind in the high valleys, and the heartbeat of those who listened. Today, the shell trumpet of Chavín de Huántar stands in museums as a silent relic, but when played, it carries a sound that is both ancient and timeless. It is a reminder that even in the most remote mountain valleys, people found ways to connect with distant places and deeper realities. It shows us that sound, like stone and gold, can be shaped into a vessel for meaning, a vessel that still resonates, even after centuries of silence. And perhaps, if you close your eyes and imagine yourself in those dark temple corridors, you might just hear it, the long, low call of a conch shell, drifting out from the shadows, calling you not just into the past, but into a space where the boundaries between the real and the sacred begin to blur. The Etruscan Bronze Chariot. When archaeologists first uncovered the Etruscan bronze chariot, it was not simply the rediscovery of a vehicle. It was like opening a time capsule into an ancient civilization that thrived long before the rise of Rome. The chariot had lain buried for more than 2.5 millennia, preserved beneath layers of earth, waiting for the day its story would be told again. Its wheels were silent now, but once they must have rattled over ceremonial roads, gleaming in the sunlight as it carried a noble or even a ruler in grand processions. The Etruscans are one of history's most fascinating enigmas. Their culture flourished in central Italy from around the 8th to the 3rd century BCE, yet much of their origin and way of life remains shrouded in mystery. Unlike the Romans, who left behind vast amounts of written records, the Etruscans left only a handful of inscriptions, many still undeciphered. What we know comes largely from their art, their tombs, and treasures like this bronze chariot. The chariot itself is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Its body is richly decorated with intricate engravings, showing scenes from mythology. Figures in dynamic poses seem to come alive in the light, their clothing, armor, and weapons detailed with astonishing skill. These engravings are not mere decoration, they are a statement of power and identity. They tell stories that the owner wanted remembered for eternity. Some depict gods intervening in human affairs, others hint at heroic battles or journeys into the afterlife. Bronze was not an easy material to work with. Crafting such a piece required not only technical skill but access to resources, copper and tin, which had to be mined, transported, and refined. The Etruscans were masters of metalwork, and this chariot is a testament to that expertise. Every curve, every rivet, every etched line speaks of a society that valued both utility and beauty. When researchers examined the chariot closely, they realized it was not built for war. Its construction and ornamentation suggested a ceremonial purpose. The wheel size, the weight distribution, and the delicacy of the fittings meant it was unlikely to have been driven at high speed into battle. Instead, it would have appeared in processions, festivals, or funerary rites, its presence a symbol of prestige. Buried alongside the chariot were fragments of other luxury goods, pottery, jewelry, and possibly textiles that had long since decayed. This suggested the chariot's owner was someone of considerable wealth and influence, perhaps even part of a ruling family. In Etruscan belief, such an individual would need symbols of their earthly power in the afterlife, and a chariot would be an unmistakable statement. The Etruscans saw death not as an end, but as a continuation of existence in another realm. Their elaborate tomb paintings and grave goods reflect this belief. A ceremonial chariot then might have been seen as a means of transport for the soul, a way to journey from the world of the living to the world beyond. What makes this chariot even more fascinating is how it bridges cultures. Many of its decorative motifs show Greek influence, mythological scenes that would have been familiar to anyone versed in the Homeric epics. This reflects the Etruscans' connections with the wider Mediterranean world. They traded with Greeks, Phoenicians, and other cultures, absorbing influences and adapting them to their own traditions. When the Romans eventually conquered Etruria, they inherited much from their predecessors. The Roman military chariot, the grandeur of their triumphal processions, and even aspects of their religious rituals had roots in Etruscan customs. Yet the Etruscans themselves faded from history, their language dying out, their cities absorbed into the Roman world. The chariot's survival is a miracle. Over the centuries, bronze objects were often melted down and repurposed. That this one escaped destruction is remarkable. It means that we can still look upon it today and imagine the scene, the gleam of polished bronze in the sun, the rhythmic clatter of hooves, the proud figure standing at the reins, the air thick with the sound of music and the scent of incense. In museums, the chariot stands as both artifact and storyteller. Visitors walk around it slowly, taking in every detail. For many, it's a moment of awe, realizing that this is not a replica, not a reconstruction, but the very same object that once rolled through the streets of an ancient Etruscan city. In studying it, archaeologists and historians continue to piece together the puzzle of Etruscan life. Each engraved figure, each worn wheel rim is a clue. But as with so many relics of the ancient world, the chariot holds back some of its secrets. We can speculate, compare, and theorize, but there will always be mysteries we cannot solve, and perhaps that is part of its magic. The chariot invites us not only to learn about the past, but to wonder about it, to imagine the pageantry of a vanished civilization, the pride of its leaders, and the hands of the artisans who shaped bronze into history. The Etruscan bronze chariot may never roll again, but in the quiet halls where it now rests, it still carries us, across centuries, into the heart of a world that is gone, yet not forgotten. The linear B tablets of Pylos. Imagine a quiet afternoon in the southwestern Peloponnese. The air is warm, the sea is a deep, calm blue, and the ruins of an ancient palace rise gently from the earth. This is Pylos, once a thriving center of the Mycenaean world. Here, more than 3,000 years ago, scribes worked diligently in storerooms and archive rooms, recording the life and needs of their kingdom. But unlike the flowing ink on parchment we imagine from later ages, their words were pressed into wet clay with a pointed stylus, and remarkably, some of those very tablets survive to this day. The linear B tablets of Pylos are not just pieces of baked clay, they are the voices of an ancient bureaucracy, frozen in time. Each one offers us a direct connection to the people who ruled, labored, and organized this Bronze Age society around 1200 BCE. When archaeologists first unearthed them in the mid-20th century, they weren't looking for an archive. They were excavating the palace complex, searching for architecture, pottery, and perhaps the traces of royal life. But tucked into storerooms, protected, in a strange twist of fate, by the very fire that destroyed the palace, were hundreds of small, flat tablets. When the palace burned, the intense heat baked these once soft clay records, preserving them for millennia. Without the fire, they would have crumbled into dust long ago. This accidental preservation gives us one of the most complete written snapshots of any Mycenaean administrative center. The script carved into them is called Linear B, a writing system long undeciphered, whose meaning was a mystery until the 1950s. To the untrained eye, the signs look like neat, repeated patterns, combinations of straight lines, curves, and little pictographic marks. For decades, scholars could only guess at their meaning. Some imagined they held religious hymns, others thought they were poetry or myth. The breakthrough came when Michael Ventris, a British architect with a passion for codes and languages, cracked the system. His discovery shocked many. Linear B was not some lost, exotic tongue, but an early form of Greek. This meant the Mycenaeans were speaking and writing a very ancient ancestor of the language we know today. That revelation rewrote the history of Greek literacy and pushed its origins back centuries earlier than once thought. The tablets from Pylos are highly practical in nature. They are not epic poems or philosophical treatises. They are lists, inventories, and records. They detail shipments of grain, allocations of livestock, rosters of workers, and offerings to the gods. There are records of women weavers and textile workshops, of bronze being distributed to craftsmen, of chariots being maintained for the military. Even the palace's religious life is hinted at. Lists of offerings to Poseidon, Hera, and other deities. For historians, this is gold. These aren't abstract references or second-hand legends. They are direct administrative documents from the very people who lived and governed here. They reveal a society that was tightly organized, with specialized roles, centralized authority, and a strong connection between religion and the state. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Pylos tablets is what they hint about the world just before its collapse. The late 13th century BCE was the twilight of the Mycenaean palatial system. Within decades of these tablets being written, the palace would be destroyed, part of the wider Bronze Age collapse that swept across the eastern Mediterranean. Many of the tablets record preparations that in hindsight may have been tied to impending conflict. Lists of weapons, mobilization of troops, and stockpiling of supplies. Were the Mycenaeans aware that their world was in danger? Or was this simply the routine of a palace, always ready for war? Another fascinating detail is the human side of the scribes themselves. We do not know their names, but we can recognize individual hands. Just as today's handwriting varies from person to person, so too did the strokes of the Mycenaean scribes. By studying the style of the signs, experts can identify particular scribes and even estimate how many were working in the palace's service at any one time. In Pylos, the tablets suggest a small but efficient corps of trained writers, each with a specialized function. The decipherment of Linear B also opened a doorway to comparing Pylos with other Mycenaean centers, Knossos in Crete, Mycenae in the Argolid, Thebes in Boeotia. Despite regional differences, the bureaucratic style is strikingly consistent, showing that these palaces were part of a broader, interconnected system. Goods and ideas traveled between them, carried by merchants, messengers, and perhaps even the same scribal traditions. Yet for all their value, the tablets also remind us of how much we do not know. They were not meant to be permanent records. Clay was used as a temporary writing medium. Once the transaction was complete, or the account balanced, the tablets could be discarded or rewritten. The only reason we have them now is because disaster struck before they could be destroyed. What we are seeing is just a fragment of a much larger, constantly changing archive. Walking through the archaeological site of Pylos today, it is hard to imagine the quiet rooms where scribes once worked. The palace is now a place of sunlit ruins, the scent of wild herbs on the breeze, the sound of cicadas in the summer air. But in your mind's eye, you can picture them. The scratch of a stylus against damp clay, the murmur of voices discussing quotas or shipments, the occasional arrival of a messenger bearing news from the countryside. These were the heartbeat rhythms of the palace, small, repetitive acts that together kept an entire kingdom functioning. The Linear B tablets give us that rare thing in ancient history, a direct, unfiltered voice from the past. They are not interpreted through myth, reshaped by centuries of oral tradition, or polished into literature. They are as raw and immediate as an email or a receipt. Simple in content, yet priceless in what they reveal. In the end, the story of the Pylos tablets is not just about the Mycenaeans, it is also about the fragile nature of human records. For every set of tablets we find, countless others have been lost forever, burned, crumbled, washed away, or simply never written down. The survival of these clay fragments is a stroke of luck that allows us to see, with unusual clarity, the daily workings of a world long gone. As the day fades over Pylos, the stones of the old palace seem to hold their secrets quietly. The tablets are now safe in museums, their signs copied and studied, their meanings still debated in detail by scholars. But there is still a strange magic in them. To trace those lines with your eyes is to follow the movements of a hand that worked here more than 3,000 years ago, a hand that pressed these marks into soft clay, perhaps without ever imagining that one day someone far in the future would read them. The Chavín Shell Mask. In the damp coastal soils of northern Japan, where the sea breeze carries the scent of salt and pine, archaeologists once unearthed an artifact that was as haunting as it was beautiful. A mask, carved not from wood or stone, but from the hard, glistening surface of a seashell. Its origins trace back nearly 5,000 years, to the time of the Chavín people, one of the world's earliest known settled cultures of hunter-gatherers. At first glance, the mask is simple. Its oval shape follows the natural curvature of the shell, and the surface bears the faint traces of careful carving. Eye holes are positioned with a precision that suggests it was made to be worn, not simply displayed. Around the edges, the shell's natural ridges remain untouched, giving it an organic, almost living quality. But to those who study it, the mask is more than just a decorative object. It is a silent testament to ritual, identity, and the strange intersection of humanity and the natural world during the Chavín period. The Chavín people lived long before Japan was an island nation as we know it today. They inhabited a world shaped by shifting coastlines, rising and falling seas, and forests filled with wild game. Their name Chavín comes from the cord-marked pottery they left behind, decorated with twisted rope impressions pressed into wet clay. This pottery style alone lasted for thousands of years, a sign of both cultural stability and deep tradition. But the shell mask suggests that their artistic and ritual lives extended far beyond pottery. When the mask was found, buried in what appeared to be a ceremonial pit, it raised immediate questions. Why would someone carve a face out of shell? Was it meant to be worn in life, used in dance or storytelling? Or was it placed upon the dead, serving as a final transformation for the journey into whatever afterlife the Jomon believed in? Some archaeologists have proposed that it could have represented a spirit or animal, perhaps part of a shamanic practice where humans embodied non-human forms to communicate with the unseen. Shells were not just convenient material for the Jomon, they carried symbolic weight. Living on the edge of the sea, the Jomon relied heavily on marine life for food and shell middens. Massive heaps of discarded shells still dot the landscape where they once lived. To carve a mask from shell may have been more than an artistic choice. It may have been a deliberate act of binding human identity with the ocean itself. The mask's pale, reflective surface would have caught the flickering light of fire during rituals, perhaps making the wearer's face appear otherworldly. Its location in northern Japan is also significant. In this region, archaeologists have found evidence of ritual spaces, areas set apart from daily life, where unusual objects were buried or arranged in patterns. The Jomon shell mask may have been part of one such ritual space, placed carefully into the ground after use, as if retiring a sacred object rather than discarding it. The carving itself shows a remarkable level of skill for a material that is brittle and difficult to work with. The shell would have had to be shaped using stone tools, with each scrape and abrasion removing only a small amount of material. One wrong move could have shattered the piece entirely. The evenness of the eye holes and the smoothness of the inner surface suggest hours, perhaps days, of patient work. This was not a casual craft item, it was something worth investing time and precision into. There is also the matter of its size. The mask is too small to fit over an adult's face, leading some to speculate that it may have been made for a child or used in ceremonies involving figurines or effigies. This possibility opens a window into the Jomon worldview. Perhaps the mask was not about concealing an identity, but transforming it, giving a human, animal, or object a new ritual life. We cannot know the exact stories told around this mask, but we can imagine the setting. A fire burns low in a coastal settlement. The night air smells of brine and smoke. Figures gather around, their cord-marked pottery filled with steaming broth from the day's catch. The mask is brought out, its surface glistening in the light, and placed upon the face of a dancer, or perhaps mounted upon a post. A chant begins, the rhythmic beating of drums made from stretched hide filling the air. The sea wind joins in, carrying the sound into the darkness. In such a moment, the line between the human and the spirit world may have blurred, if only for the duration of the ceremony. The Jomon period lasted for thousands of years, a remarkable span of time for any single cultural tradition. Over that period, styles changed, tools evolved, and new materials were introduced. But the values of connection to nature, to ancestors, to unseen forces remained constant. The shell mask belongs to this continuity, a physical reminder of how the Jomon saw themselves not apart from nature, but as part of its fabric. When we think of ancient artifacts, we often picture stone tools, weapons, or monumental structures. The shell mask is none of these. It is intimate, fragile, and personal. Yet its survival for 5 millennia is almost miraculous. The fact that it endured, when so many other organic materials from the Jomon period have not, suggests that it was treasured even after it was placed in the earth. Perhaps the people who buried it believed that it still carried power, even unused. Today the mask rests in a climate-controlled museum case, far from the wind and waves of the coast where it was made. Visitors peer through glass at its pale surface, trying to imagine the world it once belonged to. For archaeologists, it is a rare opportunity to glimpse the spiritual and ceremonial life of a prehistoric culture that left no written records. For the rest of us, it is an invitation to imagine, to picture ourselves standing on a Jomon shore, the sea at our feet, the mask in our hands, and the mystery of its purpose still unsolved. The Jomon shell mask may never tell us exactly why it was made, or who wore it. But that is perhaps its greatest gift. It leaves room for wonder. In its quiet way, it reminds us that human creativity and ritual are as old as our species, and that sometimes the most powerful connections to the past are not the grand monuments, but the small, delicate objects that once touched a human face. The bronze dove of Nimrud. If you were walking through the ruins of ancient Nimrud today, surrounded by the crumbling walls of what was once one of the most powerful cities in the Assyrian Empire, you might not expect to find something so small, so delicate, and yet so loaded with meaning. Among the towering palaces and the remains of colossal statues, archaeologists uncovered something that could fit in the palm of your hand, a small bronze dove. At first glance, it might look like nothing more than a trinket, but the more you learn about it, the more it seems to open a window into the Assyrian world, its religion, its symbolism, and its understanding of life and power. Nimrud, also known as Kalhu, was a city of immense influence in the first millennium BCE. It was here that Assyrian kings planned their military campaigns, collected tribute from across their empire, and showcased their wealth through monumental architecture and art. The walls were lined with carved reliefs of battles and hunting scenes, meant to project dominance and control. Yet hidden within this landscape of imperial grandeur, the little bronze dove suggests there was also room for subtlety, an object that may have held deep symbolic value. The dove itself is simple in form, but crafted with deliberate care. It is small, its body smooth, with a slight curve to the wings, as if it were caught mid-flight. Time has darkened the bronze to a deep, mottled green, but hints of its original polish remain. There are no elaborate engravings or inlays, suggesting that its value was not in luxury materials, but in what it represented. In many ancient Near Eastern cultures, birds, especially doves, were associated with divine presence. Some scholars connect the dove with the goddess Ishtar, the Assyrian and Babylonian deity of love, fertility, and war. In other cases, the bird symbolized peace, the arrival of good news, or the favor of the gods. The fact that this bronze dove was found within or near a temple context in Nimrud suggests it may have been a votive offering, an object left for the gods, carrying the prayers or devotion of its owner. But what is especially fascinating is how the dove might have been used. It's possible it sat on an altar, part of a larger arrangement of symbolic items, or perhaps it was mounted on a standard or placed on the top of a staff used in temple ceremonies. There's also the chance it was purely decorative, a symbolic reminder to worshippers entering the temple that they were in a place of divine connection. The Assyrian world was steeped in ritual. Priests performed daily offerings, washed sacred statues, burned incense, and recited long prayers in Sumerian and Akkadian, the sacred languages of their tradition. A bronze dove in such a setting would have been part of a visual language that everyone understood. You didn't need to be literate to grasp its meaning. You only needed to recognize the bird as a messenger between the human and the divine. It's worth noting that the Assyrians were not a culture most people would associate with peace. Their empire was built on conquest, and their own inscriptions proudly detail their victories and the punishments they inflicted on their enemies. And yet, here in the heart of their capital, in the midst of this culture of military might, someone crafted a small dove, an enduring emblem of gentler concepts. This contrast might tell us something about the duality of their worldview, that even in a world of war, there was space for ideas of harmony, blessing, and divine favor. The craftsmanship of the bronze itself is also a story. Ancient Near Eastern metalworkers had mastered the art of casting, often using the lost wax method. They could create remarkably detailed forms by first shaping the object in wax, encasing it in clay, heating the clay so the wax melted away, and then pouring molten bronze into the cavity left behind. Once cooled, the clay mold was broken, leaving the finished object. If the dove was made this way, it would have been unique. No other dove exactly like it would exist. When we think of the dove's journey through time, it becomes even more compelling. It was created nearly 3,000 years ago, in a bustling city filled with the sound of markets, the shouts of soldiers, and the chanting of priests. It would have witnessed the rise and fall of kings, the building of monumental palaces, and eventually the city's destruction. In 612 BCE, the Assyrian Empire collapsed under the combined assault of the Babylonians and the Medes. Nimrud was abandoned, its temples and palaces left to crumble. Somehow, the bronze dove survived, buried under layers of dust and earth, waiting for someone to uncover it. When modern archaeologists found it, they were not just pulling a piece of metal from the ground. They were retrieving a fragment of meaning, something that had once been part of a living culture. Its survival is remarkable. Bronze is a durable material, but small items can be easily lost, melted down, or broken. The fact that this dove endured suggests it was either forgotten in a protected place or deliberately buried as part of a ritual closure of the temple. And then there's the question of who made it and who offered it. Was it commissioned by a high-ranking priest? Was it the work of a skilled artisan creating objects for the temple? Or could it have been the personal gift of an ordinary worshipper, someone whose prayer was carried symbolically by the bird to the heavens? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps that's part of the charm. The object retains its mystery, even as we try to piece together its story. Today, the bronze dove is displayed in a museum, where it is admired not only for its age and craftsmanship, but for the questions it raises. Visitors walk past monumental Assyrian reliefs of kings and gods, and then they see this small bird, modest, understated, but radiating a sense of purpose. It reminds us that history is not just about the grand and the monumental. Sometimes the smallest objects can carry the deepest meanings. When you look at it closely, you might imagine the temple where it once stood, the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows on its polished wings, the murmuring of prayers around it. You might picture the moment it was placed in its sacred position, perhaps accompanied by the scent of incense and the sound of chanting. In that moment, the dove was more than an object. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. the bronze dove of Nimrud, reminds us that even in an empire famed for its military might, there was room for symbols of peace, blessing, and divine connection. It speaks quietly across the centuries, carrying with it the echo of a prayer once offered in the heart of an ancient city. The Greek fire siphon nozzle. There are few weapons in history that have inspired as much fear, mystery, and speculation as the so-called Greek fire. It was said to burn even on water, to cling to ships and soldiers alike, and to be nearly impossible to extinguish. It was whispered about in chronicles for centuries, described in the hushed tones of those who had seen it consume entire fleets in minutes. And yet, for all its legend, we know astonishingly little about how it was made, how it worked, or who truly held the secret. Today, we are looking at one of the rare surviving clues to this lost weapon, a small corroded bronze tube, unearthed from the wreck of a Byzantine warship. At first glance, it might not look like much. It is the kind of artifact you could walk past in a museum without noticing, its green patina blending into the shadows of the display case. But this unassuming object may have been part of one of the most feared military technologies of the ancient world, the siphon nozzle used to unleash Greek fire. The nozzle was recovered during an underwater excavation off the coast of modern-day Turkey, where the remains of several Byzantine ships were found lying silent beneath layers of silt. The ship that yielded this nozzle is believed to have been part of the Byzantine Navy's defensive fleet, perhaps one that once patrolled the Bosporus, defending Constantinople from enemy incursions. To understand why this little piece of bronze is so important, we need to step back into the 7th century CE. This was a time of siege and uncertainty for the Byzantine Empire. Enemies threatened from all directions, Arab fleets in the Mediterranean, Slavic incursions in the north, and internal power struggles within the empire itself. Constantinople, the jewel of Byzantium, stood as a city of stone walls and faith, its survival depending not just on diplomacy and fortifications, but also on innovation. It was in this climate of constant threat that Greek fire first appeared. Sources tell us it was invented by a Syrian engineer named Kallinikos, who fled the Arab conquests and offered his skills to the Byzantine emperor. The exact recipe of his invention was guarded so fiercely that it was treated like a royal treasure, known only to the emperor and a handful of trusted engineers. Even the crews who operated it may not have fully understood what they were using. The weapon itself was terrifying. Chronicles describe how bronze tubes like the one we are examining were mounted on the bows of warships. Through these, pressurized streams of liquid fire were unleashed, shooting out in blazing arcs toward enemy vessels. The fire would spread across the water, climbing up the wooden hulls, clinging to sails, and consuming everything it touched. Imagine being a sailor in the 8th century, approaching the walls of Constantinople under cover of night, thinking your fleet was prepared for battle, only to see the Black Sea suddenly illuminated by a roaring, unnatural flame that could not be quenched by water. The psychological impact alone must have been devastating. This siphon nozzle, preserved for over 1,000 years beneath the sea, is more than just a piece of metal. It is a tangible connection to those moments of terror and awe. The nozzle's narrow shape suggests it was designed to concentrate the stream, perhaps increasing its range and accuracy. Inside, traces of residue have been found, though they have long since degraded beyond recognition. Still, the very idea that the remains of Greek fire might have touched this metal makes it a relic of rare significance. Historians have long debated the composition of Greek fire. Some believe it was based on petroleum or naphtha, others on quicklime, sulfur, or a mixture of chemicals that reacted violently when exposed to water. Whatever the truth, it was more than just a flammable liquid. It required a delivery system, pressure to propel it, and a method to store it safely aboard a wooden ship. The siphon nozzle was a critical part of that system. The secrecy around Greek fire was so effective that even after centuries of its use, no enemy ever successfully replicated it. When the knowledge was lost, perhaps after political upheaval or the fall of key Byzantine territories, it disappeared completely, and yet the legend endured. Even in later centuries, enemies of Byzantium would still speak of the fire with dread, as though it might return at any moment. Standing before this artifact today, you can almost imagine it in action, mounted on the prow of a Byzantine dromon, the oars beating the water, the wind filling the sails, and the nozzle tilting forward as the crew prepared to unleash a stream of unholy flame. It's a reminder that technology can inspire not just progress, but fear, not just protection, but destruction. This little bronze tube is not a weapon anymore. It is a silent witness to an age when knowledge could be guarded as closely as a crown jewel, and when the balance of power on the seas could hinge on a secret that fit into the palm of your hand. The Greek fire siphon nozzle may never reveal all its mysteries, but in its corrosion and weight, it carries the story of a weapon that once changed the course of history. The Varna Gold Burial. It was in the quiet coastal plains of Bulgaria, near the shores of the Black Sea, that archaeologists stumbled upon a burial site that would completely rewrite what we thought we knew about the ancient world. They were not expecting to find it. The dig began as a routine excavation, one of many in a country rich with layers of human history, but when the soil was carefully brushed away and the outlines of a grave emerged, the team quickly realized this was no ordinary burial. What lay beneath was a time capsule from a civilization that had vanished long before the pyramids were built. A civilization that somehow possessed not only wealth but a remarkable mastery of metalworking, thousands of years ahead of its time. The site is now known as the Varna Necropolis, and it dates back to around 4500 BCE. That's more than 6,500 years ago, older than Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and nearly as old as the very first cities in Mesopotamia. Inside one of the graves, now famously referred to as the Varna Gold Burial, archaeologists found something so unexpected, it forced historians to rethink the timeline of human civilization. It was gold, not just raw nuggets or crudely hammered pieces, but processed, shaped, and polished gold artifacts, delicate beads, ornate bracelets, a scepter-like staff, and intricately crafted plates. This wasn't the work of a society just learning how to smelt metal. This was the work of master goldsmiths, craftsmen who already knew exactly what they were doing. The most staggering part? These artifacts are the oldest processed gold ever discovered in the world. At first glance, the burial seemed to belong to someone of great status. The individual was buried with over 3,000 pieces of gold, their combined weight far greater than anything found from this time period anywhere else on Earth. And this wasn't just jewelry, it was a language of power, a statement of authority and prestige. Every piece told a story about the social hierarchy of a society we barely even knew existed. This was a culture advanced enough to not only mine and refine gold, but to accumulate it in the hands of elites. When researchers studied the bones, they found the buried individual was a male in his 40s, quite old for that era. His stature was impressive for the time, suggesting good nutrition and a life free from the grueling labor that most of his peers endured. His hands showed no signs of heavy work. This man was no farmer or hunter. He was part of a class of people who lived above the struggles of survival, a class that held both wealth and influence. And the gold around him wasn't random, it seemed almost ceremonial. The positioning of certain objects hinted at symbolic meaning, possibly religious, possibly political. The gold-covered scepter in particular suggested leadership, maybe even kingship, over a community that extended far beyond the burial site. The Varna necropolis contained more than just this one grave. In total, over 300 burials were uncovered, many of them with gold artifacts, though none as rich as this particular one. Interestingly, some graves contained no bodies at all, just gold and other precious items. Archaeologists call these cenotaphs, and they often signify symbolic burials for people whose bodies were never recovered, or perhaps for deities or ancestors. The presence of such graves hints at complex belief systems, rituals and traditions that connected the living with the dead in ways we can only guess. What makes the Varna discovery so fascinating is that it doesn't fit neatly into the traditional timeline of technological progress. By 4500 BCE, most parts of the world were still firmly in the Neolithic age. Stone tools dominated, and metal use was rare and primitive. But here, in a corner of southeastern Europe, a society had leapt forward, developing advanced metallurgy and intricate social structures. This was the Chalcolithic era, the so-called Copper Age, and the people of Varna were at its very forefront. The sheer amount of gold suggests organized mining operations. But gold doesn't just sit on the surface in large quantities. It has to be found, extracted, and refined. How did these people know where to look? How did they develop the techniques to melt and mold it without written records or known predecessors? And perhaps most puzzling of all, what was the true purpose of collecting so much of it in the first place? Some historians believe Varna was part of a vast trade network that stretched across much of Europe and into the Near East. The Black Sea's coastline would have been a natural hub for commerce, allowing Varna's elite to acquire exotic goods and rare materials. Gold may have been traded for salt, flint, obsidian, or even food. But others think gold wasn't just a commodity, it was a spiritual substance, something believed to hold divine or eternal qualities. The grave goods seem to point toward that idea. In many ancient cultures, gold was seen as incorruptible. It doesn't tarnish, it doesn't decay. To place gold in a grave was to give the deceased something that would last forever, accompanying them into the afterlife. If this belief existed in Varna, it would explain why so much effort went into burying such wealth underground rather than using it in daily life. The mystery deepens when you look at the broader context of the time. Just a few centuries after the height of the Varna culture, it seems to have vanished. The reasons are unclear. Some theories suggest climate change disrupted agriculture, forcing people to abandon the region. Others propose invasions by nomadic tribes from the Eurasian steppes. Whatever the cause, the advanced gold-working skills of Varna disappeared for thousands of years before re-emerging in other parts of the world. And this leads to one of the biggest unanswered questions. If Varna was so advanced, why didn't its technology spread more widely? Why do we see no clear evidence of similar gold craftsmanship in neighboring regions during the same era? Did the knowledge die with its craftsmen, or did it survive in secret, passed down through hidden traditions, waiting to resurface in later civilizations? For archaeologists, the Varna gold burial is both a treasure and a puzzle. It offers an extraordinary glimpse into a world we barely understand. A society sophisticated enough to master metallurgy, establish social hierarchies, and perform elaborate burial rituals, yet fragile enough to vanish without leaving written records. Every artifact pulled from the earth raises new questions, each more tantalizing than the last. And so, the man buried in Varna lies there still, his gold gleaming softly under museum lights, a silent testament to a forgotten age. We can measure the purity of the gold, examine the craftsmanship under a microscope, even map the chemical traces of where the metal was mined. But we cannot look into his mind. We cannot ask him what his world was like, what his people believed, or what they feared. We can only stand in the present and wonder how much of our history lies buried, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. In the end, the Varna gold burial reminds us of a simple truth. Human civilization is not a straight line from primitive to advanced. It is a story full of rises and falls, of forgotten brilliance and lost knowledge. And sometimes, the past is far more golden than we ever imagined.